Chapter 868. The tree of God is absorbing spiritual energy in such a frenzied manner. Chu Fumian observed for a full 5 minutes before he finally stopped. He originally thought that the tree of God was only devouring blood essence. But now, it seemed that the tree of God wasn't just devouring blood essence, but also spiritual energy. The tree of God was one of the branches of the builder tree. With its vitality, it didn't need to devour any spiritual energy to live forever. It was a near immortal existence. He didn't expect the tree of God to be devouring spiritual energy in such a frenzied manner. The tree of God absorbed the blood essence of the warriors who died in the tree of God's domain. Everything was out of the ordinary. In particular, the appearance of these tree spirits was almost illusory. They were born without any signs. Chu Fengmian was also puzzled at the appearance of these tree spirits. But now, it seemed that these tree spirits were most likely created by the tree of God. The divine tree had created these tree spirits in order to borrow the tree spirit's strength to kill warriors and devour their blood essence. At least, most of the warriors in the tree of God's domain had died in the hands of the tree spirits. This made Chu Fengmian even more suspicious. Chu Fengmian even faintly felt that all of this had something to do with the desolate ancient sect. This was because the opening of the divine tree secret realm was initiated by the desolate ancient sect. Now that the tree of God had gathered tree spirits and was massacring in the divine tree secret realm, Chu Fengmian felt that all of this was done intentionally by the desolate ancient sect. Indeed, the opening of the divine tree secret realm is out of the ordinary. The desolate ancient sect wouldn't allow people to enter and benefit from it for no reason. Chu Fengmian thought to himself. He didn't expect to encounter such an unusual event in the divine tree secret realm. But now that the tree of God was devouring spiritual energy in such a frenzied manner, there must be something hidden within. To Chu Fengmian, this wasn't a bad thing. As long as it was related to the tree of God, it wouldn't be a small matter. Moreover, Chu Fengmian could vaguely guess that the desolate ancient sect goal was to completely control the tree of God. If the desolate ancient sect had always wanted to use the tree of God to expand, they wouldn't have done this. It was very likely that the desolate ancient sect felt that the time was ripe and wanted to take control of the divine tree. Apart from this, there was no other reason for the desolate ancient sect to do such a thing. Anyone who can obtain the power of the divine tree will stand at the top of the 9 regions. Since the desolate ancient sect wants to control the divine tree, why don't I interfere? I might be able to benefit from it. Chu Fengmian pondered and quickly came up with a plan. The desolate ancient sect was one of Chu Fengmian's greatest enemies. Even if he couldn't benefit from it this time, it was worth it for him to destroy the desolate ancient sect's plan. Chu Fengmian's body moved again and continued to fly toward the canopy above. This treetop was the core of the divine tree, and it was because of this that the dew sacred fruit grew in the treetop. As long as Chu Fengmian could reach the treetop, he would be able to observe the reason for the change in the divine tree and the desolate ancient sect's plan. Along the way, Chu Fengmian encountered many warriors. However, as long as these warriors did not provoke Chu Fengmian ignored them all. After all, with Chu Fengmian's wealth, these life and death realm martial artists, and even some old ancestors, were nothing in his eyes. Chu Fengmian couldn't be bothered to go on a killing spree. Right now, his goal was the divine tree and the dew sacred fruit. The dew sacred fruit was Chu Fengmian's goal in the divine tree secret realm. However, there were some martial artists who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. When they saw Chu Fengmian by himself, they wanted to attack him. Chu Fengmian didn't have any mercy for these people. He killed them all easily. Chu Fengmian's current strength was close to the sovereigns. If he used the Sword Sovereign Palace, those sovereigns of the heavenly fate realm wouldn't be able to kill him. Therefore, Chu Fengmian didn't encounter any danger along the way. Gradually, the treetop became bigger and clearer. Chu Fengmian had already pierced through the clouds. Above the clouds was a chaotic void. Apart from the treetop of the divine tree, there was almost nothing else. Go! The closer he got to the treetop, the greater the pressure Chu Fengmian felt. However, Chu Fengmian didn't have the slightest intention to retreat. He condensed his spiritual power, and his speed increased countless times as he rushed up. Bam! In the next moment, Chu Fengmian's body arrived at the treetop. There's actually someone on the treetop? The moment Chu Fengmian rushed up to the treetop, he felt countless auras. There seemed to be many martial artists on the treetop. As he looked around, he saw that there were at least a few dozen cultivators. These dozens of people were divided into different forces. They were all united, and there were a total of 6 forces. There's actually someone rushing up. Oh, he's actually alone? The moment Chu Fengmian rushed up to the treetop, countless spiritual consciousnesses swept towards Chu Fengmian. When they saw that Chu Fengmian was alone, these martial artists couldn't help but look over with some surprise in their eyes. To rush up to the treetop, one had to endure extremely great pressure. When they rushed up, they all joined forces and rushed up. Now, that Chu Fengmian was rushing up alone, it naturally attracted their attention. Desolate Ancient Sect, Ancient Moon Canyon, Medicine King Valley, Tianjin Sect. Chu Fengmian glanced over and saw martial artists from 4 of the forces. They were from these 4 sections. The remaining 2 forces didn't originate from the 7 major sects, but were formed by the union of some genius martial artists from smaller sections. These 6 forces were all on the treetop. They seemed to be in a stalemate and also seemed to be waiting for something. However, when Chu Fengmian's gaze swept across the treetop, he quickly understood what they were waiting for. In the center of the treetop, on a branch, a purple fruit the size of a fist could be seen clearly. This purple fruit was covered with extremely complex patterns, and it contained a terrifying amount of spiritual power. The Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. This was the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit born by the creation tree. At this moment, the patterns on the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit seemed to be incomplete. This meant that the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had yet to fully mature. Chapter 869. Above the treetop, the 6 factions were in a deadlock because of the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. The Jade Dew Sacred Fruit could not only be used to refine the Jade Dew life-breaking pill, but it could also allow the majority of peak life and death experts to break through. In the history of the 9 regions, there was no lack of extremely talented geniuses who were stuck at the peak of life and death realm. Even after using countless methods, they were still unable to break through. The heavens were fair. Generally, the more talented martial artist was, the more difficult it would be for them to break through. For example, some monstrous geniuses had the ability to kill old ancestors at the peak of life and death realm. However, if they wanted to transcend life and death and break through, it would be dozens or even hundreds of times more difficult than ordinary martial artists. These monstrous geniuses could not break through, but with the help of the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit, they could easily break through life and death and step onto the life and death steps. The value of a Jade Dew Sacred Fruit was sky high in the outside world. For Chu Fengmian, the difficulty of transcending life and death was thousands or even tens of thousands of times more difficult than ordinary life and death experts. It was impossible for Chu Fengmian to break through with his own strength. Therefore, he wanted to refine Saint Great Spirit Pills, Jade Dew Life-Breaking Pill, to defy the heavens. Chu Fengmian looked at the surrounding martial artists and saw that they had already known about the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit's ripening. Therefore, they had rushed to the treetop from the start and remained in a deadlock because the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had yet to ripen. Fortunately, the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had yet to ripen, which allowed Chu Fengmian to rush over. Looking at the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit's appearance, it would not take long for it to ripen completely. If Chu Fengmian had delayed a little longer, he might not have been able to reach the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit's ripening. At that time, Chu Fengmian would have wanted to cry, but no tears would come out. There is only one Jade Dew Sacred Fruit in the entire divine tree. The value of the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit was self-evident. At the very least, all the martial artists present were looking at the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit with burning eyes. Even some old ancestors were the same. To these patriarchs, this Jade Dew Sacred Fruit might not be of any help to them, but it was enough to exchange for an astronomical amount of wealth. Obtaining the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit was equivalent to obtaining a huge treasure. Who will want to give it up? This brat actually managed to rush up alone. Looks like he does have some strength. While Chu Fengyan was pondering, the gazes of those warriors were already sizing Chu Fengyan up. There was hostility and surprise. They were all discussing with each other. The fact that he was able to rush up to the top of the tree by himself had indeed surprised them. However, most of the gazes were filled with disdain. It was as if they did not put Chu Fengyan in their eyes at all. The appearance of a single cultivator was of no threat to these forces. After all, no matter how strong an honorable martial artist was, how strong could he be? Among the 6 great forces, there was no lack of patriarchs who had transcended life and death. Chu Fengyan's cultivation base was merely at the peak of life and death realm. They had never placed him in their eyes. Everyone, this divine tree belongs to our desolate ancient sect. This jade, dew sacred fruit, should also belong to our desolate ancient sect. In this stalemate, one of the desolate ancient sect's patriarchs suddenly spoke. Everyone, please leave. Oh, old ancestor Barren Cloud, aren't the rules of the divine tree trials set by your desolate ancient sect? All the treasures obtained in the divine tree secret realm belong to whoever obtains them. Just as the old ancestor Barren Cloud finished speaking, a mocking voice rang out. Among the warriors beside him, an old ancestor from the Tianjin sect sneered. Your desolate ancient sect wants to make us leave with just a few words? How is that possible? If you want us to leave, sure. As long as you hand over the jade, dew sacred fruit, to our Tianjin sect, we'll leave the divine tree secret realm obediently. How about it? The words of the Tianjin sect's old ancestor caused the old ancestor Barren Cloud's face to darken. Hand over the jade, dew sacred fruit, in the divine tree secret realm. The most valuable treasure was the jade, dew sacred fruit. With the jade, dew sacred fruit, the Tianjin sect's disciples would naturally return with a full load. What else was there to talk about? Old ancestor Barren Cloud, you don't have to waste your energy. This jade, dew sacred fruit belongs to whoever is capable. Among the warriors from the Valley of the Medicine Masters, an old ancestor also spoke up. But before that, everyone, it's better to get rid of this brat first. The old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters suddenly stretched out his hand and pointed at Chu Fengyan. This brat is alone. He doesn't have the right to compete with us for the jade, dew sacred fruit. Let's knock him down from the treetop first, lest he tries to fish in troubled waters. The old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters was a middle-aged man. He didn't look old, but he had become an old ancestor at such a young age. Naturally, he was one of the geniuses of the Valley of the Medicine Masters. He looked at Chu Fengyan with disdain. Brat, know your place. This jade, dew sacred fruit, isn't something you can get your hands on. Get lost now. Oh, Chu Fengyan stood where he was. He didn't expect the people from the Valley of the Medicine Masters to come looking for trouble with him. Now that the 6 factions were in a deadlock, no one dared to make the first move. But now that Chu Fengyan was alone and standing there, he was a classic example of a pushover. It seemed that the people from the Valley of the Medicine Masters wanted to make an example out of Chu Fengyan. The warriors from the other factions also fell silent when they heard the old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters speak. This action was a tacit agreement with the old ancestor of the Valley of the Medicine Masters. The 6 factions were here to compete for the jade, dew sacred fruit. Chu Fengyan was alone and didn't have the right to stand beside them and compete with them. If Chu Fengyan didn't make a move, everyone would really think of him as a pushover and want to take advantage of him. Trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters. You wanted to get lost? Do you think you have a right to do so? Chu Fengyan sneered. 6 factions? Chu Fengyan didn't think much of the 6 factions combined. It was just that the jade, dew sacred fruit wasn't ripe yet. So Chu Fengyan couldn't be bothered to make a move. After all, this was the hidden realm of the divine tree. If Chu Fengyan made a move, he might attract the attention of the barren ancient sect. Before he obtained the jade, dew sacred fruit, Chu Fengyan didn't want to be so ostentatious. But teaching a lesson to a few trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters wasn't enough for Chu Fengyan to make a move. Trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters. As soon as Chu Fengyan finished speaking, the faces of the Valley of the Medicine Masters turned cold. Chapter 870. Trash from the Valley of the Medicine Masters. Chu Fengyan's words silenced the voices of those present. The atmosphere was so tense that it reached freezing point. What an arrogant kid. Interesting, very interesting. I wonder where this lunatic came from. Apart from the disciples of the Valley of the Medicine Masters, the other warriors began to discuss after hearing Chu Fengyan's words. Their expressions were as if they were ready to watch a good show. As for the disciples of the Valley of the Medicine Masters, their expressions changed from cold to angry when they heard the discussions. They never thought that Chu Fengyan would dare to speak in such a way. Since when did someone dare to challenge the dignity of the 7 major sects? Trash? How dare you call our Valley of the Medicine Masters trash? Kid, you're too arrogant. The elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters who had spoken earlier was even more furious. All the spiritual energy in his body had already exploded. Die for me. The elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters did not hesitate to attack. His realm had already reached the 3rd step of the life and death steps, the immortal realm. As soon as he attacked, an extremely dense spiritual energy bombarded Chu Fengyan. This spiritual energy was so dense that it seemed to want to shatter Chu Fengyan's body in front of it. It could be said that the elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters did not hesitate to use his full strength. Under such anger, he did not intend to give Chu Fengyan any more time. This move was to kill Chu Fengyan. It seems that everyone in the 9 regions dares to challenge the dignity of the 7 major sects. Kid, go to hell. The elder of the Valley of the Medicine Masters roared angrily. Countless spiritual energies had already enveloped Chu Fengyan's body, trapping him and leaving him with no way to escape. However, from the very beginning, Chu Fengyan had no intention of running away. A mere immortal realm warrior was not qualified to force Chu Fengyan to flee. What a joke. So what if I trample the dignity of the 7 major sects under my feet today? Chu Fengyan's face was extremely calm in the face of the attack of countless spiritual energies. Waves of pure spiritual energy also condensed from Chu Fengyan's body. Chu Fengyan's fist suddenly struck out. As the spiritual energy blasted out, it transformed into a violent storm in the air. The spiritual energy of the Valley of the Medicine Masters Patriarch was swept away by the storm. His body was caught in the storm in an instant. What happened? Medicine Capital's ancestor was defeated just like that. One move, just one move, how is this possible? Where did this brat come from? How can his spiritual energy be so strong? In terms of spiritual power, he is even stronger than Yao Jing, who is in the longevity realm. How do you do it? Seeing the changes in this move, the other warriors were stunned, especially the Medicine King's Valley disciples. They had originally wanted to see how the Medicine Capital Patriarch would kill Chu Fengyan when he made his move. After all, Medicine Capital's old ancestor was a longevity realm old ancestor. Wouldn't dealing with an unknown peak life and death realm martial artist be a piece of cake? Who would have thought that such a situation would occur? Damn it! Caught in the storm, Medicine Capital's old ancestor regained his senses in an instant. He had just attacked in anger and did not put Chu Fengyan in his eyes. In his opinion, killing a peak life and death realm martial artist like Chu Fengyan was a piece of cake, so he did not use his full strength. After being caught in the storm, Medicine Capital's old ancestor finally recovered. After all, he was an old ancestor who had transcended life and death. Encountering danger made him immediately sober up. Brat, I didn't expect you to be hiding your strength. But it doesn't matter. No matter how much strength you have hidden, you will die here today. Medicine Capital's old ancestor said angrily as a mirror appeared in his hand. In the mirror, golden threads suddenly appeared. At a glance, there were a total of 3,000 golden threads. The moment these 3,000 golden threads appeared, the storm around Medicine Capital's old ancestor was completely broken. At the same time, these 3,000 golden threads directly bombarded Chu Fengyan's body after breaking through the storm. 3,000 golden illusion mirror. Seeing Medicine Capital's old ancestor make a move, everyone was shocked. This 3,000 gold illusion mirror is an extremely famous heaven-grade spirit artifact in Medicine King Valley. It's actually in Medicine Capital's old ancestors' hands. It seems like Medicine King Valley is determined to get the jade due sacred fruit. Otherwise, they wouldn't hand over such a valuable spirit artifact to Medicine Capital's old ancestor. The 3,000 golden threads condensed from this 3,000 gold illusion mirror are not inferior to a full-powered attack from a life-shattering old ancestor. Even an old ancestor would not be able to withstand the combined attack of 3,000 golden threads. This brat is merely at the peak life and death realm. It seems like it's over. Medicine Capital's old ancestor took out this spirit artifact. He won't give this brat any chance. Seeing Medicine Capital's old ancestor take out the 3,000 golden illusion mirror, everyone felt that the battle was over. These 3,000 golden threads were extremely troublesome even for some old ancestors, let alone Chu Fengyan, a mere peak life and death realm martial artist. However, the next scene was beyond everyone's expectations. Facing the 3,000 golden threads, Chu Fengyan's expression remained calm. He suddenly punched out, bombarding the 3,000 golden threads. Is this brat crazy? Catching 3,000 golden threads with his bare hands? Even a body cultivator wouldn't dare to be so crazy. Before these exclamations could fade away, all the martial artists present obediently shut their mouths. The 3,000 golden threads slashed at Chu Fengyan's hand, but there wasn't the slightest trace of injury. It was as if the golden threads had slashed at a hard rock. Chu Fengyan made a grabbing motion, and the 3,000 golden strands were forcibly torn apart by Chu Fengyan. 3,000 golden threads attacking together represented 3,000 life-shattering old ancestors attacking at the same time. Chu Fengyan had actually blocked such a terrifying attack with his bare hands. He had even forcibly torn apart the 3,000 golden threads. Such strength was simply beyond the knowledge of countless martial artists present. Could a peak life and death realm martial artist's strength really reach such a terrifying level? Even the core geniuses of the 7 great sects who have been nurtured since childhood can't reach such a level. Only the most monstrous of geniuses can do all this. How is this possible? The Tianjin sect's old ancestor exclaimed in shock. Chapter 871. The geniuses of the 7 great sects could be considered the most monstrous geniuses in the entire 9 regions. However, there were very few who could achieve this. Moreover, these geniuses were all famous existences in the 9 regions. Just like this, an unknown cultivator had suddenly appeared and possessed such strength. How would he accept this? Of course, the one who found it the most difficult to accept was the Medicine Capital Patriarch. Facing Chu Fengyan, he had already regarded him as an opponent, which was why he had taken out the 3,000 gold illusion mirror. It should be known that the Medicine King Valley had specially bestowed this mirror to him so that he could use it to fight for the jade, due sacred fruit. He had used the mirror to deal with Chu Fengyan because he was extremely afraid of him. But now, the 3,000 gold illusion mirror had been forcibly torn apart by Chu Fengyan, turning it into a piece of trash. He had destroyed a heaven-grade spiritual artifact with his bare hands. Chu Fengyan, who was in the air, suddenly struck out with his palm. The spiritual power contained in the Medicine Capital Patriarch's body was almost completely destroyed at this moment. His spiritual veins, body, and internal organs were completely destroyed by this palm. Although an immortal realm patriarch could recover from this kind of injury in an instant, it was still not enough to withstand the pain. However, this kind of pain couldn't be offset, especially when he was defeated by a life and death realm martial artist in front of so many people. All of this was unbearable for the Medicine Capital Patriarch. Kid, just you wait. I'm going to kill you. The enmity between us is absolutely irreconcilable. One day, I will trample you under my feet and humiliate you. The Medicine Capital Patriarch roared fiercely at Chu Fengyan. His body moved, wanting to return to the group of Medicine King Valley disciples. Trying to escape? Did I give you permission to escape? Chu Fengyan sneered, and suddenly waved his hand. The space around the medicine capital patriarch was firmly locked. No matter how much spiritual power he channeled, there was nowhere for him to escape. "Kid, what are you trying to do?" The medicine capital patriarch roared furiously at Chu Fengyan. He originally thought that Chu Fengyan had already humiliated him by defeating him in front of everyone. After all, the medicine capital patriarch was a disciple of one of the 7 great sections. Even the patriarchs of the 7 great sects wouldn't go overboard and deal with him. Countless patriarchs understood the principle of leaving a way out. However, Chu Fengyan was an exception. Chu Fengyan had never thought of leaving a way out. To deal with enemies, he only had one choice: to trample them to death. As for the medicine capital patriarch's identity as a disciple of the 7 great sects, Chu Fengyan, he didn't care. Chu Fengyan, immortal realm. Chu Fengyan, immortal realm. Chu Fengyan, forgive him. However, Chu Fengyan wouldn't give the disciples of the 7 great sects any chance. "Kneel!" With a wave of his hand, Chu Fengyan grabbed the body of the medicine capital's ancestor and brought it before him. "Medicine capital Chu Medicine Fians Li. Oh, damn it. No one has ever dared to treat me like this. Never." The medicine capital patriarch was furious when he heard Chu Fengyan's words. Making an old ancestor kneel was more humiliating than killing him. He had never knelt, even in the face of a powerful old ancestor. It was impossible for him to kneel before Chu Fengyan now. "Brat, don't go too far. Do you really think I don't have any other means? Even if I don't fight for the Jade sacred fruit, I will kill you today." The medicine capital patriarch roared furiously. As he roared, waves of medicinal power appeared. These medicinal powers seemed to have been accumulating within the medicine capital patriarch's body all this time. Now, as he opened it, the medicinal power was completely integrated into the medicine capital ancestor's body. This caused the aura of the medicine capital's ancestor to suddenly rise. The spirit force that he had used up was also instantly recovered. Any patriarch had a trump card in a life and death struggle, and the medicine capital patriarch was no exception. It was just that they generally wouldn't use it unless they were forced into a desperate situation. The medicine capital patriarch originally didn't want to use it. Even if he lost to Chu Fengyan and felt extremely humiliated, it didn't force him into a desperate situation. But now, Chu Fengyan made the medicine capital patriarch kneel. This was completely different. This was no longer an insult, but a humiliation. As long as a warrior had dignity, they wouldn't allow themselves to abandon their dignity and kneel. This brat's gone too far. He has forced the medicine capital patriarch to use his trump card. His strength is not bad, but he doesn't know when to stop. When the onlookers saw this scene, they couldn't help but shake their heads as they looked at Chu Fengyan. Doing things this way was indeed a bit too much. No matter what, the medicine capital patriarch was still a patriarch. He must have his own trump card. Among the patriarchs, there was rarely a life and death struggle because both sides would restrain themselves and not force the other to the extreme. Otherwise, a life and death struggle wouldn't be beneficial to anyone. Unless it was a life and death grudge, no one would do such a thing. In their view, the grudge between Chu Fengyan and the medicine capital patriarch wasn't worth it for both sides to suffer. Since Chu Fengyan had already taken the limelight, it was best for him to withdraw. Now that things had reached this point, there was no way to end it. However, the onlookers also had a gloating attitude. Chu Fengyan's strength was strong, so he was naturally their opponent when competing for the Jade sacred fruit. If Chu Fengyan and the medicine capital patriarch really suffered, it would be the best outcome for them. Medicine God's power reversed the universe. The moment the medicine capital patriarch's body completely recovered, a burst of spiritual power suddenly erupted from his body. This burst of spiritual power directly broke the pressure that shrouded Chu Fengyan and turned into a huge millstone that bombarded Chu Fengyan. The moment the millstone was blasted out, heaven and earth shook. It was a shocking move that the medicine capital patriarch had used up all his spiritual power. This move had a significant impact on the medicine capital patriarch's strength, so he wouldn't use it unless he was in a life and death situation. Using this move now represented the medicine capital patriarch's madness. Boom, boom, boom. The huge millstone had already shattered the layers of spiritual power around Chu Fengmian, and its power was getting stronger and stronger. If he could take advantage of this move to completely kill Chu Fengmian. Chapter 872. You still want to struggle? Don't you understand that all your struggles are meaningless in my eyes? Chu Fengmian sneered as he looked at the ancestor of medicine capital, who was still making his last stand. He didn't even use 1/10 of his strength to deal with the ancestor of medicine capital. Now, he was giving the ancestor of medicine capital the illusion of a life and death struggle. Suppress. Chu Fengmian only spat out a single word, but his aura rose steadily. Chu Fengmian suddenly threw a punch at the incomparably huge millstone. Waves of spiritual energy collided, and the millstone was suddenly shattered into pieces. The shattering of the millstone simply shattered all of Medicine Capital's ancestors' hopes. The ancestor of Medicine Capital had used his strongest technique, condensing all the spiritual energy in his body to create this huge millstone. But now, the millstone was mercilessly shattered by Chu Fengmian. Since you don't want to kneel, then I'll trample you under my feet. Chu Fengmian sneered and suddenly stomped his foot. The ancestor's face was directly stepped on by Chu Fengmian. The ancestor's head was directly crushed, and the scene was incomparably miserable. With the ancestor of Medicine Capital's vitality, he didn't die from this stomp and directly recovered. However, his face was still under Chu Fengmian's foot. He crazily condensed all his power, trying to escape from Chu Fengmian's foot. But in front of Chu Fengmian's power, the ancestor of Medicine Capital didn't even have the qualifications to escape. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Chu Fengmian easily stepped on him. An ancestor without any dignity could only be trampled under Chu Fengmian's foot, unable to break free. The ancestor of Medicine Capital lost. He actually lost so miserably. The ancestor of Medicine Capital even used his last trump card, but he still lost so miserably. The people in the crowd who were gloating over the ancestor's misfortune reduced a lot. They all felt a chill in their hearts when they saw the ancestor of Medicine Capital's current state. No matter what, the Medicine Capital old ancestor was still an old ancestor, especially since he was originally a genius of the 7 major sections. Although he couldn't be compared to the top geniuses, he was still an old ancestor. Although he wasn't among the top geniuses, he was still a famous genius with a high status in the 9 regions. But now, the ancestor of Medicine Capital was being trampled under Chu Fengmian's foot. His face was deformed, crushed, and condensed again and again. The only thing that didn't change was the endless humiliation. An ancestor's humiliation was 100 times, no, 1,000 times more than killing him. Chu Fengmian eye for an eye. The Medicine Capital's ancestor had just declared that he wanted to trample Chu Fengmian underfoot and humiliate him. Chu Fengmian was to let the ancestor of medicine. Bastard, bastard, I'll kill you, kill you. The ancestor of Medicine Capital was being trampled under Chu Fengmian's foot in front of everyone. The ancestor of Medicine Capital's expression was extremely ferocious. He urged his spiritual power again and again, trying to break free and resist Chu Fengmian. But before his spiritual power could be fully condensed, Chu Fengmian's foot mercilessly stepped on his head again and again. A crushed skull could be regrown, but the pain was unavoidable. Ah! Above the canopy, everyone could hear the ancestor of Medicine Capital's heart-wrenching screams. Even though he was an ancestor, he couldn't bear such terrible pain. Kid, let him go quickly. Little bastard, do you really want to fall out with the 7 great sects? Let him go quickly. The people of the 7 great sects won't let you go. You'll be wanted soon, and there will be no place for you in the 9 regions. The Medicine King Valley disciples couldn't bear it anymore and shouted at Chu Fengmian angrily. Little bastard? Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed a fierce glint. He suddenly waved his hand and condensed an incomparably huge palm, which directly enveloped them. The few Medicine King Valley disciples who were hooting were immediately locked on by Chu Fengmian, and Chu Fengmian's palm grabbed them. Ah! The few disciples of the Valley of the Medicine Masters who were cursing had no chance of resisting. They were caught in the palm of Chu Fengmian's hand. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Chu Fengmian's palm crushed them. Then a vortex condensed and swallowed all the essence blood of the Medicine King Valley disciples, leaving not a single drop behind. For the life and death realm warriors, and even the ancestor, as long as a drop of their essence blood was left, there was a chance for them to be reborn. But this time, Chu Fengmian didn't give them any chance of rebirth at all and directly swallowed all the essence blood. Cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. In an instant, several more Medicine King Valley disciples died at the hands of Chu Fengmian. The disciples of the 7 major sects were respected by almost everyone outside, but in the eyes of Chu Fengmian, they were like ants. He killed when he wanted to, without a care. What you're doing is a little too much. This is the divine tree secret realm, the territory of the 7 major sections. If you know what's good for you, quickly release the medicine capital ancestor. Seeing that Chu Fengmian had already begun his massacre, the desolate ancient sect's ancestor, Barren Cloud ancestor, suddenly spoke up. Although the 7 major sects had their own internal conflicts, they had always been bound together for good or ill. Those ordinary Medicine King Valley disciples and life and death realm warriors dying at the hands of Chu Fengmian was one thing. But the medicine capital ancestor couldn't die. That's right. If you don't want to go against the 7 major sects, you should know what's good for you and be a smart person. The Tianjin sect's ancestor also spoke up coldly. Sir, it's impossible for you to fight against so many of us by yourself. Release the medicine capital ancestor and apologize. Release him at once. That's right. This is the divine tree secret realm. It's not a place where you can act so presumptuously. This child is extremely vicious. It seems very likely that he's from the 6 Paths Demon Gate. Let's suppress this child first. Another ancestor spoke up. This ancestor wasn't a disciple of the 7 major sects, but a disciple of the Black Heaven sect in the southern region. He also commanded a portion of the southern region warriors and belonged to one of the factions. Suppress this child first and save the medicine capital ancestor. The Barren Cloud ancestor spoke abruptly. He had already gathered his spiritual power, and an ancient path suddenly condensed under his feet. Chapter 873. The Desolation Great Path. The supreme secret technique of the desolate ancient sect. The moment Ancestor Barren Cloud stepped onto the Desolation Great Path, he was completely separated from Chu Fengmian. It was as if he had entered a different space. His Desolation Great Path extended to Chu Fengmian's side and pulled Ancestor Yao Jing's body into it. Everyone attack and suppress this kid. Seeing Ancestor Yao Jing being pulled into the Desolation Great Path, Ancestor Barren Cloud's face relaxed. Once he stepped into the Desolation Great Path, nothing outside could affect him. He was practically invincible. Once Ancestor Yao Jing stepped into the Desolation Great Path, Chu Fengmian would not be able to attack him. The Desolation Great Path? No one has ever been able to save someone from my hands. Battle Dragon Falling Star. Chu Fengmian let out a loud roar and surrounded him in layers. Chu Fengmian's body was transformed into the appearance of the ancient war dragon. The ancient battle dragon that he turned into was extremely ferocious. It was like an ancient ferocious beast had descended. Countless warriors were terrified when they saw the battle dragon. Break! A dragon's roar resounded in front of the Desolation Great Path. This roar was enough to cause countless cracks to appear on the Desolation Great Path. It was just a dragon's roar. The secret technique of the desolate ancient sect, the Desolation Great Path, cracked just like that. What? What kind of martial technique is this? A Dragon Clan martial technique? No, I've seen countless Dragon Clan martial techniques, but I've never seen such a terrifying Dragon Clan martial technique. Ancestor Barren Cloud shouted in disbelief. With his knowledge, he had seen countless Dragon Clan martial techniques, but none of them were comparable to the one that Chu Fengmian had just displayed. Most of the Dragon Clan martial techniques in the 9 regions were learned from true dragons. Some of them were even learned from Dragon Kings and Dragon Emperors. There had never been a pure battle dragon martial technique that Chu Fengmian had displayed. It was the origin of all Dragon Clan martial techniques. After the initial shock, Ancestor Baron Cloud's eyes turned solemn. He naturally knew how terrifying this power was. Behind him, a bronze door suddenly opened. It was the Door of Desolation, a spatial door that connected to the Desolation Great Path. An endless stream of Desolation power was transmitted from the Door of Desolation, strengthening the Desolation Great Path beneath Ancestor Baron Cloud's feet. Kid, no matter how powerful your Dragon Clan martial technique is, you can't break my Desolation Great Path, Great Path. The Baron Cloud ancestors' Great Way of the Ancients grew larger and larger. With the support of the divine power of the Ancients, it grew larger and tougher. Such a vast, desolate, great Tao, supported by the Door of Desolation's endless, desolate god power, was almost impossible to break. It was an invincible existence. Desolation Great Path is indeed is technique. Secrets. Desolation Great Technique. Realm. Unless cultivation realm, a great, great realm. Realm, great realm, realm path. Path. Sectas. Senior Brother Huang Yun is invincible. The disciples of the sect of the Desolate Ancient Sect were extremely excited. They were waiting for the moment when Chu Fengmian would be suppressed. Really? Desolation Great Path? Who do you think you are? You're just an immortal realm ancestor. Even the Desolation Great Path can't protect you. Chu Fengmian suddenly sneered again and again. His sneers turned into dragon roars. Break! As the dragon roars rang out. The primordial war dragon that Chu Fengmian had transformed in a suddenly charged towards the Baron Cloud ancestor. Boom! 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 The Desolation Great Path beneath Ancestor Baron Cloud's feet rumbled under the violent impact. The Desolation Great Path was pushed back. When the last wave of power came down, the entire Desolation Great Path was filled with cracks. Then, with a loud boom, it shattered. In the Desolation Path, the bodies of the Baron Cloud ancestor and the Medicine Capital ancestor were suddenly sent flying. Both of them spat out mouthfuls of blood and fell to the ground. What kind of power is this? The Desolation Great Path has been shattered. Oh my God, is he still human? Everyone looked at Chu Fengmian as if they were looking at a demon. The Desolation Great Path couldn't be shaken by warriors of the same realm, let alone break it. Everyone was stunned as they watched Ancestor Baron Cloud's Desolation Great Path being mercilessly shattered. If it was a more powerful ancestor, they wouldn't be surprised if it was the Desolation Great Path that shattered Ancestor Baron Cloud's Desolation Great Path. After all, the Desolation Great Path was only invincible in the same realm. It was normal for it to be shattered when it encountered a more powerful ancestor. But Chu Fengmian was at the peak of the life and death realm. Originally, he was 3 whole levels away from the Baron Cloud ancestor. Moreover, Ancestor Baron Cloud was a disciple of one of the 7 major sections. His strength surpassed warriors of the same realm. Under such circumstances, Chu Fengmian's gap was even greater. No one would have thought that such a day would come. Monster! Monster! Since when did such a monster appear in the 9 regions? Not good. Let's attack together and suppress this kid. Otherwise, none of us will get the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. After recovering from their shock, the other patriarchs began to shout out loud. They were all here for the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit. The strength that Chu Fengmian displayed was simply shocking. The first thing they had to do to obtain the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit was to suppress Chu Fengmian. The warriors present had already joined forces, and countless martial skills had already bombarded towards Chu Fengmian. Layers of martial skills enveloped Chu Fengmian at the same time. There was no end to these layers of martial skills. They seemed to be endless. They wanted to crush Chu Fengmian to death and suppress him alive. Boom! Almost at the same time, an unforeseen event occurred above the tree crown. The runes on the Jade Dew Sacred Fruit that had been hanging above the tree crown suddenly condensed. The Jade Dew Sacred Fruit had ripened. Wave after wave of incomparably pure medicinal fragrance suddenly spread out. Seeing the jade, dew-sacred fruit ripening, Chu Fengmian finally revealed a smile. Since the jade, dew-sacred fruit had ripened, then there was no need to continue the stalemate. Chu Fengmian's expression became somewhat fierce. His eyes flickered with an ominous glint. Very well. It seems like I don't have time to waste with you. All of you die. Chapter 874. What a big tone. You're young, but you talk big. Kid, if you withdraw from the fight for the jade, dew-sacred fruit, we can still spare your life and let you leave. Otherwise, we'll join forces and suppress you. A few old ancestors looked at Chu Fengmian and threatened coldly. Is that so? You want to suppress me with just a bunch of dogs and chickens? I didn't kill you just now because I was stalling for time. Now that the jade dew-sacred fruit has matured, there's no need for you to live. Chu Fengmian said proudly. As long as it was a martial artist who was his enemy, they didn't have the right to live. Arrogant. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, those old ancestors were incomparably furious. No matter how strong Chu Fengmian was, he was still just a life and death realm martial artist. With so many old ancestors joining forces, they were actually being trampled on by a life and death realm martial artist. How could they endure this? Ancient moon gods might. Countless disciples of the ancient moon canyon shouted in unison. Countless spiritual energies supported the old ancestor of the ancient moon canyon. Suddenly, the old ancestor of the ancient moon canyon waved his hand. Guyu's gigantic dance suddenly came crashing down on Chu Fengmian. This ancient moon canyon contained the spiritual energies of countless disciples of the ancient moon canyon. It wanted to suppress Chu Fengmian. On the side, there were also countless martial skills to restrict Chu Fengmian's movements. All the martial artists attacked together. Their goal was to thoroughly suppress Chu Fengmian. A bunch of ants. Even if you join forces, you're still just ants. Chu Fengmian's lips curled up. Facing the attacks of countless martial skills, his expression didn't change. However, a treasured carriage suddenly appeared under his seat. On this treasured carriage, 8 ancient battle dragons roared at the same time. Chu Fengmian sat on the battle dragon treasured carriage and controlled it to fly out. This ancient moon canyon was mercilessly shattered in front of the battle dragon treasured carriage. Countless martial skills bombarded the battle dragon treasured carriage. The umbrella on the battle dragon treasured carriage slowly opened. All the martial skills bombarded it, but they couldn't even cause the slightest ripple, not to mention breaking the umbrella's defense. What a terrifying treasured carriage. This was the heavenly demon treasure carriage? 9 Demons City's heavenly demon treasure carriage? One of the patriarchs immediately recognized the origin of the chariot. Only the 9 Demons City's battle dragon chariot was capable of such a feat. Didn't Chu Fengmian obtain the heavenly demon treasure carriage? Are you Chu Fengmian? The news that Chu Fengmian had obtained the heavenly demonic treasure carriage had already spread throughout the entire central region. It could be said that the battle dragon treasure carriage had become the symbol of Chu Fengmian's identity. As long as the battle dragon treasured carriage appeared, it represented Chu Fengmian's arrival. Chu Fengmian. It's Chu Fengmian. Upon hearing this name, the gazes of the other patriarchs changed. A peerless, ferocious man. The lunatic who killed the disciples of the 7 great sections. Quickly inform the patriarch. Chu Fengmian is here. Some of the desolate ancient sect's disciples were already shouting loudly. This was the divine tree mystic realm, the core of the desolate ancient sect. These martial artists had never doubted Chu Fengmian's identity. They thought that even the lunatic Chu Fengmian would not dare to step into the divine tree mystic realm. Under the premise of offending the 7 great sects, entering the divine tree mystic realm was like sending a lamb to the tiger's den. However, they did not expect Chu Fengmian to be such a lunatic. He dared to enter the divine tree mystic realm alone. You know who I am now, but it doesn't matter. You're all going to die soon anyway. Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a cold smile. Since he was going to kill these people, he had no intention of hiding his strength. Chu Fengmian, I didn't expect you to be so arrogant. You still dare to enter the divine tree mystic realm. The barren cloud patriarch, who had been sent flying by Chu Fengmian, struggled to get up and looked at Chu Fengmian coldly. Soon, the experts of the desolate ancient sect will know about this. In the divine tree mystic realm, you won't be able to escape even if you have wings. Is that so? Then let's see if the experts of the desolate ancient sect are faster, or if my sword is faster. Chu Fengmian sneered disdainfully. A sharp blade suddenly appeared in his hand. Then, the ancestral dragon supreme sword suddenly condensed in Chu Fengmian's hand. The moment Chu Fengmian held the ancestral dragon supreme sword, his aura was completely different from before. Chu Fengmian's strongest point was still his sword Dao. A sword cultivator's true form was only when he held a sword in his hand. Hiss! Chu Fengmian suddenly unsheathed his sword. The sharp blade suddenly split into thousands of rays and slashed at all the warriors present. Oh no! Block it quickly. That's the ancestral dragon's supreme sword. These warriors had heard of the ancestral dragon's supreme sword's reputation. When they saw Chu Fengmian unsheathing his sword, they hurriedly gathered their spiritual energy to block it. Layers of spiritual energy condensed in front of the countless martialists to form a huge barrier in an attempt to block the sword. Ridiculous! Chu Fengmian's face was filled with disdain. How could these people possibly be able to withstand his sword light? Crack! The sword light slashed onto the spiritual energy barrier. In an instant, the barrier was shattered into pieces. The countless warriors behind the barrier were all annihilated by the swords. Every warrior's body was destroyed by the sword ray and turned into a cloud of blood mist. There was no possibility of rebirth. Except for a few patriarchs, almost all the other warriors were killed by the sword ray. How could this be? What kind of swordsmanship is this? How could there be such a terrifying swordsmanship? The Tianjin sect patriarch shouted in disbelief. The Tianjin sect was known as the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the 9 regions. The Tianjin sect was the most respected swordsmanship in the 9 regions. However, Chu Fengmian's sword ray was beyond his imagination. Even the countless swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjin sect could not be compared to Chu Fengmian's. The 9 regions swordsmanship created by Chu Fengmian did not belong to the 9 regions. It had surpassed countless swordsmanship in the 9 regions and reached a new level. Even the countless swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjin sect could not be compared to Chu Fengmian's. However, the countless swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjin sect was useful to Chu Fengmian. If he wanted to perfect the 9 regions swordsmanship, he had to obtain all the swordsmanship recorded in the 9 regions. Sooner or later, Chu Fengmian would obtain the swordsmanship recorded in the Tianjin sect. Chapter 875. Damn it, Barren Cloud. When are the experts from the desolate ancient sect going to arrive? Some of the old ancestors were in a frenzy. Under Chu Fengmian's sword, all of the life and death realm martial artists were killed except for the old ancestors. Even a few of them had exhausted all of their spiritual power and barely survived. They didn't even have the strength to resist. These old ancestors couldn't imagine how a life and death realm martial artist could force them to this point. Chu Fengmian was rumored to be barely able to fight with the old ancestors. How could he be so strong? Soon. I've already sent a message. Although there aren't any old ancestors in the Divine Tree Secret Realm, it won't take long for them to arrive. The Barren Cloud Old Ancestor said anxiously. Wait for the experts from the desolate ancient sect to arrive? Do you think I'll give you the chance? All of you die. Chu Fengmian snorted and attacked. He wouldn't give the Barren Cloud Old Ancestor a chance to buy time. This time, Chu Fengmian's appearance in the Divine Tree Secret Realm might attract some terrifying experts from the desolate ancient sect. It might even attract some sovereigns of the Heavenly Mandate Realm. After all, Chu Fengmian's appearance in the Divine Tree Secret Realm was the best opportunity for Chu Fengmian. The desolate ancient sect wouldn't let go of this opportunity. The best plan was to kill these people, take the Jade sacred fruit, and leave. Sky-piercing sword shadow. Chu Fengmian swung his sword again, creating a sky full of sword shadows. No, Chu Fengmian, you can't kill me. I'm from the Black Heaven sect. not one of the 7 major sections. If you kill me, the Black Heaven sect will hunt you down. The Black Heaven sect old ancestor looked at Chu Fengmian with fear and shouted, "As long as you don't kill me, I won't tell anyone about what happened today. I won't fight with you for the jade, do sacred fruit. You can't kill me. I don't even care about the people from the Black Heaven sect and the 7 major sections. The Black Heaven sect is nothing." Chu Fengmian sneered when he heard the Black Heaven sect old ancestor's threat. The number of people he killed would not change. Since these old ancestors wanted to suppress him just now, all of them deserved to die. Chu Fengmian would never do something like releasing a tiger back into the mountains. Releasing a tiger back into the mountains would cause endless trouble in the future. Die. As Chu Fengmian spoke, the sword shadows pierced through the bodies of countless patriarchs. Screams rang out one after another. Although they stopped abruptly, all the ancestors had died under Chu Fengmian's sword. After killing all the warriors, Chu Fengmian descended from the sky and landed on the crown of the tree. He walked in front of the jade, dew sacred fruit. The jade dew sacred fruit had a strange purple color when it was ripe. Chu Fengmian could smell the fragrance of herbs as he approached it. Just this medicinal fragrance alone was enough to help some weaker warriors increase their chances of breaking through. I've finally obtained the Jade Dew life-breaking pill's last sacred medicine, the Jade Dew holy fruit. Chu Fengmian was overjoyed as he gathered his spiritual power. A giant hand made of spiritual energy grabbed at the Jade Dew sacred fruit. As long as the Jade Dew sacred fruit wasn't in his spatial ring, Chu Fengmian couldn't let down his guard. In a breath's time, the giant hand of spiritual energy was formed and grabbed at the Jade Dew sacred fruit. The power of this grab was something that ordinary patriarchs couldn't resist. However, Chu Fengmian knew that since the Jade Dew sacred fruit grew on the divine tree, the divine tree wouldn't give it to him so easily. Boom! Boom! Just as the giant hand of spiritual energy was about to touch the Jade Dew sacred fruit, suddenly, countless rays of light appeared around the Jade Dew sacred fruit. The multicolored light had appeared without a sound. It had extended from the divine tree. Sacred medicines had some consciousness, so they naturally didn't want to be taken by a warrior. You want to fight me with a mere stalk of Saint Herb? Endless dragon aura, break for me. Chu Fengmian roared. Layers of dragon scales appeared on his body, forming a huge array. Endless dragon aura came crashing down. Under the erosion of the dragon's might, the strength of the light gradually became weaker and weaker. It had already begun to shatter. Not good. Someone is attacking the divine tree. The Jade Dew sacred fruit. Someone wants to seize the Jade Dew sacred fruit. Damn it. It's Chu Fengmian, that little bastard. An old figure suddenly appeared in the divine tree secret realm. It was a white-haired old man who seemed to have lived for many years. However, time had only left a mark on his appearance. The spiritual energy in his body was extremely vigorous. Every step he took was enough to shatter the space. On the other side, the layer of light was finally broken under the dragon aura. After all, this was only the power of the Jade Dew sacred fruit, and not the true power of the divine tree. If it was the power of the divine tree that condensed the multicolored light, if the divine tree was condensed by the divine tree, Chu Fengmian wouldn't be able to break it even if he used all his skills. Great, I got the Jade Dew sacred fruit. Chu Fengmian looked at the fist-sized purple fruit in his hand and hurriedly opened his empty ring and put the Jade Dew sacred fruit into it. Now it's time to leave. A jade talisman suddenly appeared in Chu Fengmian's hand. It was the jade talisman to leave the divine tree secret realm. Little bastard, how dare you set foot in the divine tree secret realm? Die. Just as Chu Fengmian was about to crush the jade talisman, a thunderous roar came from the sky. A furious roar suddenly descended from the sky, followed by an enormous amount of spiritual energy. This spiritual power fell from the sky like a huge wave, sweeping toward Chu Fengmian, leaving him with nowhere to hide. They're here so quickly. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with coldness. He didn't expect the experts of the desolate ancient sect to move so quickly. It seemed like Chu Fengmian was a huge threat to the desolate ancient sect. Now, in less than a minute, there were already experts rushing over. Seventh level of the life and death realm, destiny realm. Chu Fengmian raised his head and saw the old man's appearance. He also felt the old man's strength at a glance. It was just as Chu Fengmian had expected. A true old man of the desolate ancient sect, an emperor, had arrived. Chu Fengmian, I admit that your arrogance is beyond my imagination. I didn't expect you to come to the divine tree secret realm alone. However, today is the day you die. You've been against the 7 major sects for so long and killed my desolate ancient sect. It's time for you to pay for it. Chapter 876. This wave of spiritual energy descended from the sky and blasted down, turning into an incomparably huge palm. This palm seemed to be at least 1,000 miles wide. The power of the palm shattered the surrounding space. It was a palm that could destroy everything. That palm strike was aimed directly at Chu Fengmian's body. This palm contained an extremely terrifying killing intent. A peerless emperor of the desolate ancient sect had made his move. He was the current ruler of the divine tree secret realm, the ancestor emperor. This was intolerable. In the ancestor emperor's heart, his anger had reached its peak. Chu Fengmian had killed countless disciples of the desolate ancient sect and still dared to come to the divine tree secret realm. He even wanted to snatch the dew sacred fruit. This was intolerable. This action showed that Chu Fengmian did not put the desolate ancient sect in his eyes. He came to the divine tree secret realm alone and killed the disciples of the 7 major sections. This was a provocation to the desolate ancient sect. If this matter were to spread, the desolate ancient sect would not be able to establish itself in the 9 regions. Allowing a life and death realm warrior to roam freely in the divine tree secret realm was a humiliation to any expert of the desolate ancient sect. When the ancestor emperor heard about Chu Fengmian, he was furious. Without any hesitation, he chased after Chu Fengmian and wanted to kill him. As an emperor, the ancestor emperor had disregarded his status to deal with a life and death realm warrior. However, one could see how much hatred the ancestor emperor had for Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's appearance was a thorn in the heart of the desolate ancient sect. As long as it was not removed, the 7 major sects would not be able to raise their heads in the 9 regions. Divine tree secret realm. Seal it. Rumble. As the ancestor emperor spoke, the surrounding space was suddenly sealed. The entire divine tree secret realm was completely shut down with his words. The jade talisman in Chu Fengmian's hand lost its luster. The divine tree secret realm was sealed, making it impossible for anyone to leave. This was an indestructible seal that could seal the entire divine tree secret realm. The emperor's means are indeed extraordinary. He can even seal the divine tree secret realm. Chu Fengmian was about to secretly crush the jade talisman and leave as soon as possible. Who would have thought that the ancestor emperor would arrive so quickly? Kid, since you've fallen into my hands today, you're already dead. Give up on struggling. You won't be able to escape from the divine tree secret realm today. The ancestral emperor looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly, You've killed so many of our disciples from the 7 great sections. You deserve death. However, I'll give you a chance today. As long as you hand over all the treasures you've obtained, I'll give you a chance to live. What do you think? The ancestral emperor stared at Chu Fengmian from a lofty position. His gaze was locked onto Chu Fengmian, as though he had already grasped Chu Fengmian's life and death in his hands. Sovereign? Very good. I haven't fought against an emperor before. This is my first time fighting against an emperor. Chu Fengmian's expression didn't change at all when he saw the ancestral wild. The arrival of the ancestral wild was indeed beyond Chu Fengmian's expectations. However, since he dared to come to the divine tree secret realm, he had already guessed that there would be an emperor coming to deal with Chu Fengmian. Even if it wasn't the ancestral emperor, there would be other emperors coming. It didn't matter who came. Although Chu Fengmian had fought against a few emperors from the North Sea Academy back in the Sword Sovereign Palace, neither Chu Fengmian nor the Yi Huang had used their full strength at that time. This time, it was truly the time for Chu Fengmian to fight against an emperor. A life-and-death realm martialist fighting against an emperor? Throughout the history of the 9 regions, there had never been such a crazy act. However, Chu Fengmian was going to go crazy for once today. He wanted to see exactly how powerful this ruler was. Sword. The ancestral dragon supreme sword was suddenly unsheathed. Chu Fengmian held it in his hand and slashed out with a sword light. Crash! The moment the sword light slashed out, the surrounding space shattered. Sky-splitting sword. The moment the sword light slashed out, it was enough to slash open a crack in the heaven and earth. It was one of the most ferocious sword moves in the 9 regions sword arts. I'm the Sword Emperor. Sword shatters heaven and earth. Chu Fengmian no longer concealed the sword intent on his body. The strength of the sword intent was terrifying to the extreme. Facing an emperor, Chu Fengmian naturally knew that it was impossible for him to hide anything. Courting death. Seeing that Chu Fengmian still dared to attack, the ancestral emperor's face revealed a trace of anger. He was an emperor, and this Chu Fengmian, who was merely at the peak of life and death realm, dared to attack him. This was no different from an ant provoking a ferocious tiger. With a thought from the ancestor emperor's spiritual energy poured down from his palm. The power of this palm enveloped the entire horizon as if the firmament had fallen. It collided with Chu Fengmian's power on the spot. Boom! Chu Fengmian's sword light slashed at the power of this palm and directly tore apart the spiritual energy. However, the power of this palm was so strong that it far surpassed Chu Fengmian's imagination. The power of Chu Fengmian's sword light was simply a drop of water in the ocean compared to the vast firmament. His sword was sharp, but in the next moment, it suddenly twisted. Boundless spiritual energy immediately bombarded Chu Fengmian's body. Is this the true power of an emperor? Chu Fengmian could feel that his sword was destroyed by an extremely pure and powerful power. It was a pure oppression of power. Even if Chu Fengmian's sword was sharp, it could only be forcibly crushed in front of this ruthless power. This was the power of an emperor. Even Chu Fengmian could kill a heart-refining expert who was at the 6th step of the life and death steps. However, when facing an emperor, he was powerless. In this exchange, Chu Fengmian clearly understood the power of an emperor. It could be said that even 100 heart-refining old ancestors couldn't be a match for an emperor. This was a completely different realm, a chasm. Although it was only a step away, it was so close yet so far away. Without taking this step, it was impossible to contend against an emperor. Brat, do you know the strength of an emperor? No matter how profound your sword technique is, it's meaningless in front of true power. The ancestral emperor looked at Chu Fengmian and coldly said, "Since you're not willing to speak, then this old man will capture and suppress you. At that time, this old man will still know all your secrets." Chapter 877. Above the sky, an old figure suddenly descended. It was the emperor who had attacked, the ancestor emperor. Although he was incomparably old, the vitality in his body was much stronger than any other youth. His spiritual energy was also extremely robust. His gaze was filled with boundless killing intent as he looked at Chu Fengmian. Just being looked at by this gaze filled with killing intent was enough to make a martial artist tremble. The surrounding spiritual energy had all submitted to this old man. This was the pressure of an emperor, seizing the mandate of heaven, becoming an emperor. This emperor appeared in the sky and pointed at Chu Fengmian. The space around Chu Fengmian froze. Chu Fengmian was unable to take another step forward. "Kid, although I don't know what kind of grudge you have with my desolate ancient sect, a mere life and death realm martial artist actually has such strength. It seems like you've had a lot of fortuitous encounters." The ancestor emperor looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly. The ancestor emperor spoke. Every word of his was filled with an unparalleled might. Even some life and death realm martial artists, and even some old ancestors, didn't dare to resist after hearing his words. This was the prestige of an emperor. No one dared to disobey. "I'll give you a chance." Submit to our desolate ancient sect, become our slave, and pledge your loyalty to us. If you don't submit, you'll die. The ancestor emperor took a step forward and arrived before Chu Fengmian. The terrifying pressure on his body was simply about to suppress Chu Fengmian. Not good. Chu Fengmian already felt that in the face of this pressure, even the spiritual energy in his body had already been firmly suppressed. Within his body, the battle dragon bloodline was roaring crazily, wanting to break out. However, in front of this absolute power, it was being suppressed. The strength of an emperor wasn't something Chu Fengmian could contend against right now, unless Chu Fengmian took another step forward and became an old ancestor. At that time, even if he faced an emperor, he would still have the strength to fight. But how difficult would it be to break through? At this moment, it was impossible for Chu Fengmian to break through. The appearance of this emperor simply cut off all of Chu Fengmian's paths of survival, forcing him into a dead end. It seems like you still want to resist. Is that so? Then you won't have any more chances. I'll completely suppress you. The ancestor emperor looked at Chu Fengmian without uttering a word. His eyes revealed some anger, and he couldn't wait any longer. As he waved his hand, an endless amount of spiritual energy pressed on Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian only felt that his body was heavier than a mountain. His internal organs and his body were being squeezed crazily. Chu Fengmian had suppressed countless martial artists before, but this time it was his turn to experience the feeling of being suppressed by someone else. Damn it, I'll never be suppressed. So what if you're an emperor? Sword's Palace, come out. Chu Fengmian madly. Following this roar, a golden light suddenly appeared on Chu Fengmian's body. The golden light immediately shrouded Chu Fengmian's body, reducing the pressure on his body by a lot. This golden light was the power of the Sword Emperor Palace. This old man wants to see which expert dares to go against my desolate ancient sect. Seeing the power that erupted from Chu Fengmian's body, the ancestor emperor's eyes flickered. He glanced at Chu Fengmian as if he wanted to see through Chu Fengmian. In an instant, the ancestor emperor's pupils contracted and he was shocked. This is Beimang Palace? Beimang Palace is actually on you? The old man of the Beimang Academy thinks so highly of you that he handed over Beimang Palace to you? The Sword's Palace, also known as the Beimang Palace, was extremely famous in the Beimang Academy. The ancestor emperor had been to the Beimang Academy before, so he recognized the Sword's Palace at a glance. But kid, even if the Beimang Palace comes to protect you, you'll still be suppressed by me. You're just an artifact spirit, and you want to go against me? Break for me. The ancestor emperor coldly snorted, and the anger on his face deepened. He suddenly stretched out his hand and punched towards Chu Fengmian. The power of this punch shattered the spiritual energy of the Sword's Palace around Chu Fengmian. There was even a tenth of the power that bombarded Chu Fengmian's body. Crack! Crack! Chu Fengmian's body was like a spiritual artifact as countless cracks appeared on it. His entire body was on the verge of collapse as he was sent flying 1,000 miles away. What a terrifying power. Even the Sword's Palace can't stop the ancestor emperor. Chu Fengmian looked at the spiritual energy on his body that was shattered by a single punch, and he felt a sense of danger in his heart. The strength of the ancestor emperor was simply many times stronger than the Sun Emperor, Night Emperor, and the others. His true strength was probably close to the 8th step of the life and death steps, the ultimate realm. Young master, I need spiritual stones. I need a large amount of spiritual stones to support it. Yin Jian's anxious voice rang out in Chu Fengmian's mind. Although he had been constantly devouring Chu Fengmian's spiritual stones, at this critical moment, the consumption of spiritual energy was in the hundreds of millions. In just a few breaths of time, more than half of the spiritual energy accumulated in the Sword's Palace had been consumed. All right, Chu Fengmian did not hesitate as he opened up his spatial ring. Countless spiritual energy poured into the Sword Emperor's palace as it burned continuously. Hundreds of millions of spiritual stones burned crazily in the Sword Emperor's palace. The Sword Emperor's palace appeared in the sky and wrapped Chu Fengmian's body within. Run! If he continued to be entangled with the Ancestor Emperor, only death would await him. He was afraid that after a while, it wouldn't be as simple as the Ancestor Emperor. The emperors of the desolate ancient sect would rush over. At that time, the Sword Emperor's palace would not be able to protect Chu Fengyan. Yes, the Sword Emperor's palace burned its spiritual energy and recovered its strength. It wrapped Chu Fengyan within and turned into a streak of light as it rapidly fled into the distance. The space of the divine tree secret realm had been completely sealed. Chu Fengyan could only escape into the divine tree secret realm. The divine tree secret realm was incomparably huge. There was also a lot of primal chaos chi hidden within. Given the size of the divine tree secret realm, it wouldn't be easy for the experts of the desolate ancient sect to find him. The streak of light of the Sword Emperor's palace was extremely fast. In an instant, it had already crossed 1,000 miles. Brat, don't even think about escaping today. However, behind Chu Fengyan, another figure appeared. A middle-aged man walked through the air. Beneath his feet was a mysterious sky shuttle. Chapter 878. The moment this middle-aged man appeared, the surrounding spiritual energy submitted to him. His aura was exactly the same as the Ancestor Emperor's. Another emperor. Chu Fengyan felt an incomparable sense of danger in his heart. Just the Ancestor Emperor alone was enough to force Chu Fengyan into a desperate situation. But now, another emperor had appeared. Emperor Su, you're here too. Seeing the middle-aged man, Chu Fengyan revealed a smile. It seems like this kid is going to die today. Let's go and capture him first. The Ancestor Emperor and Emperor Su both activated their escape lights and chased after Chu Fengyan. Today, the desolate ancient sect was determined to kill Chu Fengyan. They had no intention of letting Chu Fengyan off. To deal with Chu Fengyan, they actually sent out 2 emperors to deal with him. One must know that emperors were extremely rare in the desolate ancient sect, excluding those old fogies who cultivated in seclusion and didn't listen to orders. In the entire desolate ancient sect, there were less than 10 emperors who could command them. Now, they had sent out 2 of them to kill Chu Fengyan. There was probably no one in the 9 regions who could receive the same treatment as Chu Fengyan. Damn it, these people from the desolate ancient sect actually want to kill me so badly? Could it be that they know of my secret? Chu Fengyan's eyes flashed with a hint of gloominess. Originally, Chu Fengyan thought that the desolate ancient sect would divert their attention with the appearance of the 6 demon gates. But now, it seemed like the desolate ancient sect's desire to kill Chu Fengyan was even greater than before. The 2 emperors activated their escape lights and chased after Chu Fengyan. The sky shuttle under Emperor Su's feet was extremely fast. Compared to the speed of the Sword Sovereign Palace, it was even faster. Almost instantly, it caught up to the Sword Sovereign Palace and was only a step away from Chu Fengyan. It's the Beimang Palace? Where did this kid come from? The Beimang Academy actually took out the Beimang Palace? When Emperor Su saw Chu Fengyan in the Sword Sovereign Palace, his face was as shocked as the Ancestor Emperor's. An existence like the Beimang Palace represented the foundation of a sect. It was the sacred ground of a sect. Since when did a holy land take out something like this and hand it over to a life and death realm martial artist? Emperor Su, there's no need to worry so much. This kid has countless fortuitous encounters. Once we suppress him, we'll naturally know his identity. The ancestral emperor shouted loudly while controlling his flying light. Good. Let's suppress him first. Emperor Su didn't want to ask any more questions. He condensed his spirit energy and instantly sealed the Sword Emperor Peak. The surrounding space became extremely hard and turned into a cage, trapping the Sword Emperor Palace inside. Brat, come out of Northern Mang Palace. It's meaningless for you to resist. Emperor Su trapped Chu Fengyan and shouted from outside. The faster you resist, the faster you will die. Damn it. Standing in the Sword Emperor Palace, Chu Fengyan could sense that the space around the Sword Emperor Palace had been completely sealed. Under such a blockade, even the Sword Emperor Hall was unable to break out of the encirclement. Yunjian, can you break out? Chu Fengyan said anxiously. Right now, There are already two emperors chasing after Chu Fengmian. If this dragged on, wouldn't there be a third emperor? A fourth emperor? Right now, it was impossible for these two to break out of the Sword Emperor Palace. But if there were more and more experts, in the end, the Sword Emperor Palace wouldn't be able to protect Chu Fengmian. No, young master. With my remaining strength, I can only contend against one emperor. With the two of them joining hands, it's impossible for us to escape. Yin Jian also appeared from the Sword Emperor Palace with an anxious expression. No matter how strong the Sword Emperor Palace was, it was still a spirit tool. Its strength was closely related to its user. If Chu Fengmian reached a level that transcended life and death, he naturally wouldn't be afraid of emperors. However, it was far from enough to contend against two emperors with just the Sword Emperor Palace's strength. If I can break the seal of the Divine Tree's secret realm, I can use the Cloud Feather Palace to return to Sinkhole Sky. However, the Divine Tree's secret realm has been sealed. Even the Cloud Feather Palace can't communicate with it. Chu Fengmian inwardly calculated. He had just tried to use the Cloud Feather Palace to escape. However, the Ancestor Emperor was one step ahead and sealed the entire Divine Tree's secret realm. Chu Fengmian's spiritual energy couldn't be transmitted out, so he couldn't communicate with the Cloud Feather Palace. No, I can't sit here and wait for death. I have to escape to a place first. Only death awaited him if he sat here and waited for death. Chu Fengmian was well aware of this point. Yin Jian, if the surrounding spiritual energy is broken, how far can we escape in an instant? Chu Fengmian thought for a moment and asked. In an instant, at most a few thousand miles. Then, Emperor Su will still catch up. Yin Jian thought for a moment and said. Emperor Su's speed was too fast. The sky shuttle under his feet was also a famous spirit tool. Emperor Su's name was Su, which represented his speed. Among the countless rulers, they were outstanding. It was almost impossible to escape from his pursuit. A few thousand miles should be enough. Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. He had already formulated a plan in his heart. I'll break the surrounding spiritual energy in a moment, and you'll bring me back to the Divine Tree. Back to the Divine Tree? Yin Jian asked in confusion. The Divine Tree was the center of the entire Divine Tree secret realm. If they wanted to escape, they had to escape to other places. Going to the Divine Tree was no different than walking into a trap. That's right. Only by going to the Divine Tree will we have a chance of survival. Chu Fengmian nodded. Chu Fengmian had already sensed that the various abnormalities in the Divine Tree's secret realm were related to the Divine Tree. Even if they escaped in other directions, Emperor Su would catch up with them. It was better to return to the Divine Tree. Perhaps Chu Fengmian could figure out the reason for the abnormalities in the Divine Tree and fight for a chance of survival. The more dangerous it was, the calmer Chu Fengmian was. He had already formulated a plan. All right. Yin Jian nodded after hearing Chu Fengmian's plan. Chu Fengmian was now the owner of the Sword Emperor Palace. Thus, Yin Jian immediately knew what Chu Fengmian was thinking. Although Chu Fengmian's plan was risky, there was still a chance of survival. For the current Chu Fengmian, as long as there was a chance of survival, he had to fight for it. Chapter 879. That kid is hiding in the North Mang Palace. Outside the Sword Emperor Palace, Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor were discussing as they looked at the palace. The two of them had already sealed the space around the Sword Emperor Palace. The Sword Emperor Palace couldn't move at all. If Chu Fengmian came out, the two of them had absolute confidence that they could suppress him in a single move. Hiding in a tortoise shell like the North Mang Palace, what can we do to him? Emperor Su looked at the Sword Emperor Palace helplessly. As emperors, they were actually helpless against a puny life and death realm martial artist. This made Emperor Su's face turn somewhat ugly. When did two rulers make a move? How could they be forced to this extent? It's fine. Let him hide in this tortoise shell. This old man has already sent a message to the sect. It won't be long before someone comes to deal with him. Ancestor Emperor's gaze was ice cold as he slowly said, if possible, it's best to capture this kid alive. This kid has too many secrets. Moreover, he's been targeting our 7 great sects for a long time. There's a high chance that he's hiding something. The heavenly demon treasured carriage, the ancestral dragon supreme sword, his sword array, and now the North Mang Palace. Emperor Su listed Chu Fengyan's fortuitous encounters and said with a jealous expression, "Where did a mere life and death kid get so many fortuitous encounters?" Many famous spiritual tools of the 9 regions have fallen into his hands. It's fine. It won't be long. Once Emperor Hua and the others arrive, we'll be able to break this tortoise shell. Ancestor Emperor coldly said, "Is that so? Unfortunately, you won't be able to wait until then." A mocking voice suddenly rang out. A figure suddenly appeared from the Sword Emperor Palace. This figure was Chu Fengyan. "Chu Fengyan, you still dare to come out? Seems like we don't need to wait for Emperor Hua and the others to arrive. The 2 of us can suppress you. Kid die." Ancestor Emperor and Emperor Su, these 2 emperors, immediately attacked when they saw Chu Fengyan. Countless suppression arts bombarded Chu Fengyan. The 2 of them had already accumulated their spiritual power outside the Sword Emperor Palace. They were waiting for Chu Fengyan to appear so that they could suppress him directly. The ancient human emperor enlightened all living beings. Chu Fengyan appeared from the Sword Emperor Palace, holding a broken jar in his hand. In an instant, following Chu Fengyan's angry roar, waves of spiritual energy erupted from the broken jar. This wave of spiritual energy was much more difficult to see through than any spiritual artifact. A wave of incomparable power rushed out. The power that sealed the surrounding space was instantly shattered. What kind of spiritual weapon is this? How can it possess such terrifying power? The Ancestor Emperor and Emperor Su exclaimed in shock. With their strength, when they looked at the broken jar and saw the power on it, they felt fear from the bottom of their hearts. It was as if he would die on the spot if he was hit by the power of the broken jar. An extreme immortal weapon. This is a legendary extreme Tao immortal weapon. The Ancestral Emperor was the first to react. Even a most powerful heaven-grade spiritual tool could not make a ruler feel so fearful. It was no longer a heaven-grade spiritual weapon that could do this, but a legendary extreme Tao immortal weapon. Only an extreme Tao immortal weapon that surpassed a heaven-grade spiritual weapon could make them feel so terrified. Although the Emperor Jar in Chu Fengyan's hand only contained 4 fragments, it could not unleash the power of true knowledge. But it was enough to deal with a few emperors. Boom! The power of the Emperor Jar was condensed to the extreme in an instant, and it suddenly blasted out. The moment the power blasted out, Chu Fengyan's body began to shatter. With his current strength, he could not even control the power of the Emperor Jar. His body began to shatter. This was the terror of an extreme Tao immortal weapon. Even if it was a broken extreme Tao immortal weapon, the power of the Emperor Jar was not something an ordinary warrior could use. Even Chu Fengyan had to rest for a while after using it. Otherwise, it would be enough to injure his body. Chu Fengyan did not intend to use the Emperor Jar unless it was a last resort. But since it was you, Chu Fengyan had used all his trump cards to deal with the 2 emperors. There was no other way. "Break!" Chu Fengyan roared. The power of the Emperor Jar was fully displayed, and it blasted out crazily. "Oh no! Retreat!" The 2 sovereigns were horrified to the extreme. They hurriedly retreated, but how could their speed compare to that of the Emperor's Jar? Their bodies were instantly swallowed up by the power of the Emperor Jar. Countless explosions rang out in the air. The spiritual energy around Chu Fengyan was also shattered by the attack of the Emperor Jar. Now is the time. Chu Fengyan leaped into the Sword Emperor Palace. The Sword Emperor Palace turned into a streak of light and flew towards the divine tree. Damn it, this kid is trying to escape. Amidst the countless explosions, 2 figures suddenly flew out. They were the Ancestor Emperor and Emperor Su. They were worthy of being peerless emperors. Under the power of the Emperor Jar, they flew out directly. But now, they no longer had the majesty of the emperors. They were battered and exhausted. At least, they were seriously injured. Even with their strength, they could not recover quickly. Chase after them. Don't let that kid escape. The 2 streams of light instantly chased after them. In the Sword Emperor Palace, Chu Fengyan also noticed the changes behind. Sovereign Su and the Ancestor Emperor had already caught up to him. Emperors are really difficult to deal with. The power of the Emperor Jar is not enough to kill them. Chu Fengmian sighed inwardly. He had activated the power of the Emperor Jar, but only seriously injured the two. If Chu Fengmian could step into the life-shattering realm, he was confident that he could kill the two of them. It seemed that the breakthrough had to be fast. But before that, Chu Fengmian had to complete his plan. Suddenly, a drop of essence blood flew out from Chu Fengmian's fingertip. The moment this drop of blood essence flew out, a surge of spiritual energy suddenly appeared from the divine tree. Like a greedy snake, it swallowed the blood essence in one gulp. Chapter 880. Sure enough, it's the divine tree that's constantly devouring spiritual energy. At a glance, Chu Fengmian saw that the greedy snake was actually a tree root. It was the root of the divine tree. After devouring the drop of essence blood, it hurriedly returned to the divine tree. I want to see what secrets are hidden in the divine tree. Chu Fengmian activated the Sword Emperor Palace and followed it without hesitation. This drop of essence blood had already been branded by Chu Feng. Even if it were to be devoured by the tree root, it would still be devoured. Chu Fengmian could clearly feel that the root was sending the spiritual energy of the drop of essence blood to a place. Chu Fengmian traced the path of the drop of essence blood and came to the edge of the divine tree. He saw that the drop of essence blood was devoured by the root and then drilled into the divine tree. There seemed to be another universe inside the divine tree. After the drop of essence blood entered the divine tree, it came to an extremely vast and boundless place. There's a hidden space inside the divine tree. Chu Fengmian was shocked when he sensed the direction of the drop of essence blood. Boom! Just as Chu Fengmian was hesitating, a sky shuttle suddenly appeared behind him. The two sovereigns, Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor, had already caught up. As long as Chu Fengmian stopped, they would catch up to him in almost a second. There's no time to think. I can only go in and take a look. Chu Fengmian's face suddenly changed. He used the power of the Emperor Jar to temporarily block the two sovereigns and break their guard. However, this was only a temporary delay. The next time Chu Fengmian used the power of the Emperor Jar, the two sovereigns would not be so unprepared. If they were prepared, Chu Fengmian would not be able to deal with them, even if he used the power of the Emperor Jar. There was only one chance, so Chu Fengmian could not hesitate any longer. Chu Fengmian's figure moved continuously and came to the divine tree. The divine tree emitted an extremely terrifying power. Although the divine tree had no consciousness now, it was still very powerful. However, it was impossible for anyone to break through the defense of the divine tree. The divine tree emitted a wave of spiritual energy that formed a barrier. This barrier was definitely one of the most terrifying barriers in the world. If any warrior attacked this barrier, he would be devoured by the power of the barrier. At that time, he would only die. Even the sovereigns did not dare to provoke the divine tree, let alone break the barrier of the divine tree. But this time, Chu Fengmian had a plan. He had his own way. Chu Fengmian's mind flickered, and a sharp sword intent burst out from Chu Fengmian's body. There seemed to be a layer of profound power hidden in the sharp sword intent. In Chu Fengmian's body, his natal sword origin and the power of creation suddenly condensed. A sword of creation condensed in Chu Fengmian's palm. The moment the sword of creation was formed, Chu Fengmian sensed that the divine tree instinctively felt a sense of fear. The power of creation was the most terrifying power in the world. Ordinary power could not break the divine tree's defense, but the sword Fengmian could. The sword Fengmian. The sword Fengmian. The sword Fengmian. The power surrounded Chu Fengmian. He looked like he had turned into a sword Fengmian. Break for me. Chu Fengmian sensed the divine tree's fear the moment he got close to it. He felt the sword Fengmian. The divine tree's barrier was broken. Chu Fengmian relied on the sword Fengmian and stepped into the divine tree. The divine tree's barrier was thick. However, Chu Fengmian had the help of the sword Fengmian. Even if Chu Fengmian's power was like an ant in front of the divine tree, the sword Fengmian was enough to frighten the divine tree. The divine tree did not dare to attack Chu Fengmian. No matter how strong the divine tree was, it did not have its own spirituality. Otherwise, how could the people of the desolate ancient sect control it? Even if all the experts in the desolate ancient sect were to join forces, there would still be no match for the tree of God. Chu Fengmian passed through the barrier and gradually reached the end. His figure instantly merged with the divine tree. Looking from the outside, Chu Fengmian could no longer be seen. 3 breaths after Chu Fengmian entered the divine tree, 2 figures arrived at the place where Chu Fengmian was. They were Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor. What's going on? Where's that kid? Why did his aura disappear all of a sudden? Ancestor Emperor's face was ugly. He was furious. The 2 of them chasing after Chu Fengmian was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. 2 emperors dealing with a life and death realm expert. If news of this spread out, they would lose face. But even under such circumstances, Chu Fengmian still managed to escape from their hands. This time, his aura disappeared. It was as if he had really escaped. How could they tolerate this? They were furious and humiliated to the extreme. Emperor Su, who was standing beside Ancestor Emperor, looked calmer, but he was also embarrassed. He also felt that Chu Fengmian's aura disappeared around the divine tree. They did not know where he went. Don't worry. The divine tree secret realm has been sealed. That kid can't have left. He must have lured us here on purpose and used some method to hide his aura. Emperor Su said coldly, "Gather the sect's disciples and turn the divine tree secret realm upside down. I don't believe that a life and death realm kid can survive under the pursuit of our desolate ancient sect." All right, let's do that. After hearing Emperor Su's words, the Ancestor Emperor nodded his head. The 2 of them moved and disappeared from the divine tree secret realm. At the same time, Chu Fengmian had already passed through the divine tree's barrier. The moment he stepped into the divine tree, the scene around him spun. Chu Fengmian's body seemed to have been transported to another space by a force. When Chu Fengmian slowly opened his eyes, the golden color around him had changed. A towering giant tree was in front of him. The appearance of this giant tree was almost identical to the divine tree outside. But when Chu Fengmian saw this giant tree, he felt that it was the real divine tree. What was on the outside was merely his illusory image. Chapter 881. The moment Chu Fengmian broke the barrier of the divine tree, he found himself in a unique space. The divine tree in front of him was no different from the one in the divine tree secret realm. However, Chu Fengmian could tell at a glance whether it was real or fake. This was the real divine tree. The divine tree outside was just a camouflage of the desolate ancient sect. This is the inside of the divine tree? Or is this the real divine tree secret realm? Chu Fengmian looked around and couldn't help but exclaim. Who would have thought that there was another world within the divine tree of the divine tree secret realm? It should be said that no one would step into this place. The barrier around the divine tree was fatal to countless warriors. If Chu Fengmian hadn't used his blood essence to find out that there was another world in the divine tree, he wouldn't have taken the risk to enter. It seemed that there was a conspiracy in the divine tree secret realm. These are the jade, sacred fruits. Chu Fengmian's eyes scanned the divine tree, and suddenly his eyes widened. At a glance, there were plenty of purple fruits on the divine tree. These purple fruits were exactly the same as the jade, sacred fruits that Chu Fengmian had fought for on the tree crown. No, they were all jade, sacred fruits. At a glance, there were at least 50 to 60 jade, sacred fruits hanging on the divine tree. There are so many jade, sacred fruits. Chu Fengmian was surprised. Although he was overjoyed, this was a great opportunity. A real treasure. Just one of these jade, sacred fruits was enough to make countless warriors fight for it. Back on the tree crown, Chu Fengmian risked exposing his identity and used all his strength to get that one jade, sacred fruit. But now, there were 50 to 60 jade, sacred fruits. If used well, it was enough to create 50 to 60 old ancestors. What did that mean? There were less than 100 old ancestors in the entire Northern Mang Academy. The jade dew sacred fruits in front of Chu Fengmian were enough to create half of the old ancestors in the Northern Mang Academy. After 10,000 years, the Northern Mang Academy had nurtured countless geniuses in order to slowly accumulate 100 ancestors. What Chu Fengmian obtained this time was equivalent to nurturing half of the North Sea Academy's ancestor. This was simply a windfall. If this sacred tree were to appear in the outside world, the other sects of the 7 major sects, such as the Tianjin sect and the Medicine King Valley, would probably fight for it at all costs. No wonder the desolate ancient sect could rise so quickly. With the help of the divine tree, it would be difficult for them to not rise. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but sigh. As long as the divine tree bore a jade dew sacred fruit, the desolate ancient sect would nurture an ancestor who had transcended life and death. It should be known that peak life and death realm experts weren't few in number in the 9 regions. However, there were only a handful of peak life and death realm experts who could surpass life and death. It could be said that it was less than 1 in 100. There were 50 to 60 jade dew sacred fruits on each of the divine trees. In the tens of thousands of years after the desolate ancient sect obtained the divine tree, the number of jade dew sacred fruits the desolate ancient sect had obtained was unimaginable. It could be said that the desolate ancient sect had grown from an unknown sect to one of the 7 major sections. It was all thanks to the divine tree's nurturing. It seems like the desolate ancient sect doesn't dare to use the jade dew sacred fruits to nurture martial artists. I can't believe they've accumulated so many. Chu Fengmian looked at the 50 to 60 jade dew sacred fruits on the divine tree and thought to himself, if the desolate ancient sect were to produce too many new ancestors, it would be enough to attract the attention of the 9 regions. Therefore, the desolate ancient sect had always kept a low profile. These 50 to 60 jade dew sacred fruits grew on the divine tree and wouldn't be taken away by others. After all, the real divine tree was hidden behind the divine tree secret realm's barrier. Even emperors couldn't enter, so it was naturally very safe. But this time, it was an anomaly. Chu Fengmian actually discovered the secret of the divine tree secret realm and entered. This was no different from a tiger entering a flock of sheep. Chu Fengmian and the desolate ancient sect were mortal enemies. Since he had entered today, he naturally couldn't return empty-handed. Taking away all the jade dew sacred fruits was equivalent to the desolate ancient sect having 50 to 60 fewer ancestors who had transcended life and death. This was enough to make the desolate ancient sect's heart ache for a while. Take them all from me. Chu Fengmian suddenly burst out with spiritual energy. Around him, waves of spiritual energy transformed into several sky-devouring divine pythons. They charged directly towards the divine tree. The jade dew sacred fruits on the divine tree sensed the danger and tried to use their spiritual energy to resist Chu Fengmian. But Chu Fengmian was already prepared. The moment the spiritual energy burst out, it was completely suppressed by Chu Fengmian's dragon power. These jade dew sacred fruits were directly devoured by the sky-devouring divine pythons, and all of them fell into Chu Fengmian's spatial ring. In less than 5 minutes, all the jade dew sacred fruits on the divine tree were taken by Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian wouldn't leave a single one to the desolate ancient sect. A total of 68 fruits. Chu Fengmian looked at the jade dew sacred fruits in his spatial ring and was overjoyed. Good. So many jade dew sacred fruits. I don't believe I can't break through this time. He didn't have 100% confidence that he could break through after refining the jade dew life breaker pill. But this time, with these jade dew sacred fruits, it was different. If a life and death realm martial artist, no, even a peak life and death realm pig, ate so many jade dew sacred fruits, it would be enough to push him to the life-shattering realm. It should be known that for an ordinary peak life and death realm martial artist, a single jade dew sacred fruit was enough for a perfect breakthrough. Even some of the monstrous geniuses could only obtain 2 at most. 3 was the limit. Now, Chu Fengmian had 68 fruits. Adding on the materials he had prepared, it was enough to refine the jade dew life breaker pill. With such confidence, Chu Fumian had full confidence that he could break through. No, this divine tree isn't devouring spiritual energy to nurture the jade, dew, sacred fruits. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian felt that the drop of essence blood he deliberately released wasn't fused with the divine tree. Instead, it went to another place. Chu Fengmian could faintly feel that all the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured in the divine tree secret realm had gone to another place. Chapter 882. If the divine tree was devouring spiritual energy wantonly in order to condense the jade, dew sacred fruit, it should have devoured all of the spiritual energy into its body. However, Chu Fumian noticed that the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured was sent to another place, in a valley less than 3 miles away from the divine tree. Let's go and take a look. Chu Fumian's eyes flickered. With a slight movement, he flew towards the divine tree. Chu Fengmian came to investigate the divine tree secret because he wanted to see where the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured went. These jade, dew sacred fruits were obtained by accident. Since he was already here, he might as well investigate thoroughly. Chu Fengmian's figure flickered as he arrived at the valley. This is a divine tree? Chu Fengmian glanced over and saw a hidden tree in the depths of the valley. This tree looked almost exactly the same as the sacred tree outside. However, it was much smaller than the sacred tree. It was only about the height of a person. Compared to the heavenly tree outside, it was tens of thousands of times smaller. It looked like a young sapling. This is a divine tree? A newly grown divine tree? Chu Fengmian sensed the spiritual energy emitted by the tree. Although it was weak, it was exactly the same as the divine tree. The divine tree is absorbing spiritual energy so crazily to nurture this newly grown divine tree. Chu Fengmian was shocked. He didn't expect it to be like this. Almost all the spiritual energy the divine tree devoured was sent to this small divine tree. After the shock, Chu Fengmian's heart began to beat wildly. What was an opportunity? What was a treasure? This was a real treasure, a new divine tree. Compared to the jade, dew sacred fruits Chu Fengmian had obtained before, this new divine tree was the real treasure. Even if there were 100 or 1,000 jade, dew sacred fruits, they would not be able to compare to this young divine tree. Chu Fengmian had witnessed the divine tree's power. Even 100 sovereigns couldn't be compared to a real divine tree. Although the effective divine tree in front of him was only a sapling, it would eventually grow up one day. When it grew to the same level as the divine tree in front of him, anyone who wanted to control this power would be almost invincible. The desolate ancient sect had grown to become one of the top 7 sects in the 9 domains just by relying on the dew sacred fruit that grew on the divine tree. As for the power of the divine tree itself, the desolate ancient sect was still far from being able to use it. If the barren ancient sect could control the full power of the tree of God, they would surpass the other 6 sects and dominate the 9 regions. The huge sacred tree had matured completely. The power it contained was something that no honorable martial artist could subdue. This was also the reason why the desolate ancient sect was unable to subdue the divine tree even after such a long time. That was because the incomparably huge divine tree had already reached a level where no one could subdue it. Thus, no matter how powerful he was unable to use it. However, the young divine tree in front of him was different. Chu Fengmian felt that the effective divine tree was like a newborn. It was still very young and weak. If Chu Fengmian could subdue the divine tree and make it recognize him as its master, he would be able to nurture it thoroughly in the future. It wouldn't be a problem for him to become the emperor of the 9 domains. I must get this young divine tree. Chu Fengmian was determined to get the divine tree. He had to get this divine tree. Once he got the divine tree, the benefits it would bring to Chu Fengmian in the future would be endless. Once he got the divine tree, he would have no opponents in the future. Regardless of the 9 domains genius battle, Chu Fengmian could easily take first place. This divine tree doesn't seem to be hostile towards me. Chu Fengmian walked to the side of the divine tree and realized that it wasn't hostile towards him. This surprised Chu Fengmian a little, and he suddenly understood in his mind. Chu Fengmian's body had once refined the builder tree branch. The power of the builder tree branch had already integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. Therefore, to the divine tree, Chu Fengmian was like its own kind, which was why it wouldn't be hostile towards him. This was the best news for Chu Fengmian. No matter how weak the young divine tree in front of him was, it was still a divine tree. It was the same kind as the colossal creature outside. If Chu Fengmian was the slightest bit careless, he might be attacked by it. At that time, not to mention subduing it, it wouldn't be easy for him to escape unscathed. At the very least, Chu Fengmian felt that the power of the divine tree in front of him was not inferior to that of a ruler of the heavenly mandate realm. Suppress. Chu Fengmian observed for a moment and suddenly condensed his spiritual power. Endless dragons might envelop him. All of it enveloped the divine tree. If he wanted to get the divine tree, he had to make it submit and recognize him as its master. However, just as the dragons might envelop it, the divine tree suddenly sensed danger. A green spiritual power burst out from it. The green spiritual power instantly spread out. The dragon's might on Chu Fengmian's body was directly dispersed. Even his body was sent flying dozens of meters away by the green spiritual power. Fortunately, the divine tree only had instincts, so after sensing danger, it stopped attacking. Otherwise, it would have been extremely dangerous for Chu Fengmian just now. Even so, under the bombardment of the green spiritual power just now, all the bones in Chu Fengmian's body were broken. It was only when he circulated the power of the War Dragon technique that he recovered. Chu Fengmian moved his body and approached it again. No, this divine tree's power still far surpasses mine. It's even more terrifying than an ordinary ruler. Chu Fengmian looked at the divine tree and could not help but frown. Chu Fengmian originally felt that subduing this young divine tree should not be that difficult. Now, it seemed that the divine tree's power was still far beyond his imagination. After all, the divine tree was once a part of the builder tree. Now that it was independent, it also had the power to suppress the ancient times. It was easier said than done to subdue it with manpower. Nevertheless, Chu Fengmian would never agree to let him return empty-handed. Subduing a young divine tree was an opportunity that could last for 1,000 or 10,000 years. Even if Chu Fengmian was reborn 10,000 times, he would not encounter it again. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In the history of the 9 regions, no one had successfully subdued a divine tree. If Chu Fengmian could do it, he would truly become the #1 person in the 9 regions. No, I must get this divine tree. Chapter 883. How is it possible for the divine tree to leave? Chu Fengmian had to get this divine tree. If he didn't, he wouldn't leave. Chu Fengmian pondered for a moment and made a decision. I'll break through inside this divine tree. He couldn't subdue this young divine tree because his realm wasn't high enough. His realm was too low, only at the peak of the life and death realm. No matter how many fortuitous encounters he had, he could only kill an old ancestor at the 6th step of the life and death steps, the heart-refining realm. However, if he met an emperor at the fate realm, Chu Fengmian wouldn't even be able to fight against the weakest emperor, let alone defeat him. Was it because Chu Fengmian didn't have enough fortuitous encounters? Chu Fengmian had more fortuitous encounters than any other so-called genius in the 9 regions. He had lived 2 lives, possessed peerless sword skills, obtained the battle dragon art, and formed the divine veins. Any genius in the 9 realms would pale in comparison to Chu Fengmian. If Chu Fengmian wanted to increase his strength, the only way was to break through. As long as he could break through and transcend the life and death steps, his strength would increase by dozens or even hundreds of times. If Chu Fengmian wanted to subdue this young divine tree, there was only one way, and that was to break through. Chu Fengmian had collected enough herbs for the Jade-Du life-breaking pill. It was time to refine the pill and break through. The divine tree secret realm is extremely safe. Those guys from the desolate ancient sect won't think that I'm here. This is the best chance to break through. Chu Fengmian thought to himself. The divine tree's secret was related to the foundation of the desolate ancient sect. Only a few people in the sect knew about it. Even Emperor Su and Ancestor Emperor's people might not know about this secret. Therefore, Chu Fengmian should be safe for a short period of time. Now that Chu Fengmian wanted to break through, this was the best place. Rumble! A ball of golden dragon flame suddenly appeared in front of Chu Fengmian. At the same time, Chu Fengmian opened his spatial ring. Countless sacred herbs were placed in front of Chu Fengmian. These were the herbs that Chu Fengmian had painstakingly collected. Chu Fengmian's hands formed countless complicated seals, condensing a huge cauldron in front of him. This cauldron had 9 dragon heads, each of which emitted scorching flames. Countless sacred herbs were thrown into the cauldron by Chu Fengmian without batting an eyelid. Immediately, all of the sacred medicines melted into waves of medicinal liquid. This medicinal liquid was the size of a wash basin. Countless golden dragon flames crazily grilled the medicinal liquid around it. Soon, the medicinal liquid began to shrink, from the size of a wash basin to the size of Aziz's. Every time, the liquid's is immortal, the sacred's tita. These were the impurities tts, s-tts, the sb's, the immortal tt, tst, tts. If these impurities weren't removed, the refined elixir would be even more terrifying than a poisonous elixir. Chu Fengmian's nerves were stretched taut as he wholeheartedly devoted himself to refining the elixir. He had to control the dragon flame at all times. Once the temperature was slightly higher or lower, it would cause the liquids to be destroyed. Chu Fengmian didn't know how much effort he had spent to collect the set of Jade Life Breaker elixir's ingredients. There were also countless coincidences. If old ancestor Divine Spring hadn't appeared, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have been able to obtain so many sacred herbs. Therefore, it was almost impossible to collect them again. For Chu Fengmian, this was his only chance to refine the Jade Life Breaker elixir. If he wanted to break through to the life-shattering realm, he had to rely on the Jade Life Breaker elixir's power. Time passed second by second. After 20 hours, Chu Fengmian sat on the same spot, wholeheartedly controlling the flame. For 20 hours, Chu Fengmian didn't move at all. He wasn't distracted at all. Even for an old ancestor, it was extremely unbearable to be so wholeheartedly immersed in the process. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian had refined many elixirs before, so he had the patience to do so. Not only were the ingredients of this saint-grade elixir hard to find, but the alchemists who could refine it were also hard to find in the entire 9 regions. Another 4 hours passed. A day passed. Chu Fengmian's body was already covered in sweat. Although he could use his spiritual energy to clean his body in an instant, he couldn't focus at all. But now, Chu Fengmian couldn't be distracted at all. He could only let the clothes stick to his body. This ball of medicinal liquid had also shrunk from the size of a wash basin to the size of a fist. It was already shrinking to its limit. From this medicinal liquid, one could already smell the medicinal fragrance within. Condense. In an instant, the medicinal liquid's purity reached its peak. All the impurities were refined by Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate at all. He immediately condensed his spiritual energy and surrounded the medicinal liquid. Within the medicinal liquid, the appearance of a spiritual elixir gradually began to condense. Crack! Crack! The surrounding medicinal fragrance was immediately injected into the spiritual elixir, and countless elixir patterns were engraved on it. These were the unique elixir patterns of a saint-grade spiritual elixir, which represented the identity of the saint-grade spiritual elixir. Every elixir pattern engraved on it was enough to increase the efficacy of the saint-grade spiritual elixir by several folds. 7 patterns. This Jade Life Breaker elixir is indeed an item that countless warriors dream of. It actually reached the level of 7 patterns. The refinement of the Jade Life Breaker elixir was finally completed. When Chu Fengmian saw that there were a total of 7 patterns on it, he couldn't help but sigh. Saint-grade spiritual elixirs had 1 to 9 patterns, with 9 patterns being the highest. A 7-pattern Saint-grade spiritual elixir was considered an extremely high-grade item among the Saint-grade spiritual elixirs. With this Jade Life Breaker elixir, Chu Fengmian could already be ranked among the top alchemists of the 9 regions. However, Chu Fengmian wasn't interested in admiring it now. The battle dragon bloodline in his body, the ancient battle dragon phantom, was already thirsting for the Jade Life Breaker elixir. He was almost unable to endure it anymore. Chu Fengmian's strength had already reached its limit, and his body was already about to break through again. Swallow. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate at all. He immediately swallowed the Jade Life Breaker elixir. The moment Chu Fengmian swallowed the Jade Life Breaker elixir, the medicinal efficacy of the elixir was completely integrated into his body. Chapter 884. Chu Fengmian's body suddenly began to surge with a powerful force. Chu Fengmian's body and his battle dragon bloodline were surging. Chu Fengmian felt that the bottleneck in his body that had not been broken for a long time was finally loosening again. Sure enough, this Jade Lifebreaker pill is worthy of being a 7-mark sacred pill. This force is enough to loosen my bottleneck. Chu Fengmian could clearly feel the changes in his body. The battle dragon shadow had already begun to crave the spiritual energy. It was like a big eater that was starving. Chu Fengmian's spiritual energy was sucked dry in an instant, but it was still far from satisfying his hunger. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian was already prepared. He had saved up countless spirit stones just for this moment. Blood Sea, come out. Chu Fengmian suddenly opened the empty ring, which contained the Blood Sea obtained from Dragon Emperor Yengu's Mansion D. The Blood Sea was simply an ocean of spiritual energy. The moment the battle dragon shadow in Chu Fengmian's body saw the Blood Sea, it frantically drilled into it. In the center of the Blood Sea, it turned into an incomparably huge whirlpool. It devoured the surrounding Blood Sea and continuously absorbed the spiritual energy in the Blood Sea. 50,001 drops. 50,002 drops. In Chu Fengmian's body, the 50,000 drops of ancient battle dragon blood essence that he had not used for a long time condensed again. Chu Fengmian could feel that his body and his strength were crazily expanding. However, the growth of this force was extremely slow, as if it was still suppressing Chu Fengmian's body. The bottleneck in Chu Fengmian's body had not been completely broken. Not enough. This is far from enough. Chu Fengmian could clearly feel that the bottleneck in his body had only opened a small hole. If he wanted to break through, this was far from enough. He needed more strength. Jade Sacred Fruit. Chu Fengmian waved his hand, and the remaining 67 Jade Sacred Fruits appeared directly, floating in the air. He suddenly grabbed one of the Jade Sacred Fruits and directly swallowed it. Waves of spiritual energy began to be refined from Chu Fengmian's body again. Not enough. It's not enough. Chu Fengmian swallowed another 4 or 5 fruits. However, he still felt that there was a bottleneck in Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian had long known that with his monstrous aptitude, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through. However, he did not expect that even after refining this Jade life-breaking pill, he was still unable to break through. Chu Fengmian's aptitude was simply too monstrous. Even throughout the history of the 9 domains, there were very few people as monstrous as Chu Fengmian. Even the heavens would be jealous of such monstrous geniuses. That was why it was so difficult for Chu Fengmian to break through. Devour them all. Chu Fengmian opened his mouth and devoured the fruits one by one. This single fruit was enough to allow a peak life and death realm martial artist to easily break through. However, Chu Fengmian had devoured 30 to 40 of them in a row, yet his cultivation base was still stuck at the peak of life and death realm. Boom! Boom! The spiritual power in Chu Fengmian's body had reached its limit. If Chu Fengmian failed to break through this time, he would most likely be stuffed to death by his own power. When Chu Fengmian devoured the last Jade Sacred Fruit, a kacha sound suddenly came from Chu Fengmian's body. This kacha sound, it seemed to represent the shackles that had been binding Chu Fengmian for a long time. His bottleneck had finally been broken. Boom! The devouring speed of the whirlpool in the blood sea instantly increased by several hundred times. No, several thousand times. An endless amount of spiritual power was devoured into Chu Fengmian's body. I've finally broken through the bottleneck. Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed some joy. The bottleneck that had been binding Chu Fengmian for a long time was finally broken. This was much more difficult than Chu Fengmian had imagined. If Chu Fengmian only relied on the power of the Jade Dew life-breaking pill, he would not be able to break through the bottleneck. However, Chu Fengmian had to devour 66 Jade Dew sacred fruits before he could break through the bottleneck. This time, I really have to thank the Ancestor Emperor and Su Emperor. Chu Fengmian's eyes were extremely cold. If it wasn't for the Ancestor Emperor and Su Emperor's continuous pursuit, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have been able to leave the Divine Tree secret realm. Chu Fengmian wouldn't have found the secret of the Divine Tree and obtained so many Jade Dew sacred fruits. From this point of view, Chu Fengmian was indeed going to repay the two of them. The Ancestor Emperor and Su Emperor had chased Chu Fengmian for so long. It was time for Chu Fengmian to repay them. Walala! The speed at which the ancient war dragon's shadow condensed the ancient war dragon's blood essence was simply terrifying. Drops of ancient war dragon's blood essence fell into the ancient war dragon's shadow like rain. This time, no matter how fast the whirlpool in the blood sea was devouring, Chu Fengmian no longer felt like he was about to burst. The only feeling Chu Fengmian had now was carefree. It was like a person who had been shackled for a long time and finally broke through the shackles one day. Chu Fengmian's aura was changing with every passing moment. It was growing stronger with every passing moment. The blood sea is going to be devoured completely? Chu Fengmian looked at the empty ring and noticed. In the empty ring, the seemingly endless blood sea was gradually shrinking under the devouring of the whirlpool. At this rate, even the blood sea would be devoured completely. The War Dragon skill is really a glutton. The spiritual power contained in the blood sea is enough to establish a sect. It's even enough to support forces like the 7 major sects for 100 years. Now it's all being devoured. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but sigh. If other martial artists were to cultivate the War Dragon skill, no one would be able to satisfy the devouring of the War Dragon skill. However, this time, Chu Fengmian would let the War Dragon skill devour as much as he wanted. Chu Fengmian suddenly waved his hand, and a long river of spiritual stones suddenly appeared in front of him. The long river of spiritual stones was densely packed with hundreds of millions of spiritual stones. Every single one of them was a royal-grade spiritual stone. All of them were condensed by Chu Fengmian using the power of the Divine Vein. He had been accumulating them all this time. This time, it was finally time to use them. Chapter 885. All the treasures, all the wondrous items in the world come out. Chu Fengmian opened almost all the spatial rings he had. All the wondrous items he had obtained from the ruins of End and the treasures in Cloud Feather Palace flew out one after another. All of them fell into the incomparably huge vortex in the sky. Chu Fengmian's accumulation all this time finally came in handy at this moment. As the vortex continued to devour, Chu Fengmian's power grew by a notch. Carefree. Chu Fengmian hadn't felt so carefree in a long time. Chu Fengmian's current strength was completely incomparable to his previous strength. It was unknown how many times stronger he was now. Even now, it was still expanding with every passing moment. 2 hours later, the incomparably huge vortex finally began to slow down. All of Chu Fengmian's spirit stones, all of his accumulation, were completely devoured by the vortex. Only then did the vortex gradually disappear. It's done. Chu Fengmian's spiritual power gradually began to converge and return to calmness. Chu Fengmian had finally transcended life and death and become an old ancestor. Moreover, he wasn't an ordinary old ancestor. After devouring so much spiritual power, Chu Fengmian's realm had leaped to the 3rd step of the life and death steps, the immortal realm. Once he broke through, he actually broke through 3 realms in a row. If any martial artist outside knew about this, they would feel that it was a little shocking. In the entire 9 regions, only Chu Fengmian, who cultivated the battle dragon art, could do so. However, Chu Fengmian's strength wasn't just because of his realm. Chu Fengmian wasn't an ordinary immortal realm old ancestor. When he was at the peak of life and death steps, he could already kill an old ancestor at the 6th step of the life and death steps, the heart-refining realm. Now that Chu Fengmian had transcended life and death, his true strength was probably stronger than 100 immortal realm old ancestors combined. Even if he faced an emperor, an ancestor emperor, Chu Fengmian was confident that he could directly kill the two without relying on the Sword Emperor Palace. Moreover, Chu Fengmian had countless fortuitous encounters. The ancestral dragon's supreme sword, the battle dragon treasure carriage, and even the Emperor Jar. These were all supreme spirit tools of the 9 domains. When Chu Fengmian was at the peak of life and death realm, he was far from being able to display the true power of these spirit tools. Now that Chu Fengmian's realm had advanced and his strength had increased, the power of these spiritual weapons was completely different from before. It could be said that the current Chu Fengmian was many times more terrifying than the Chu Fengmian of the past. The current Chu Fengmian could crush him to death with a single finger. This change in cultivation level made Chu Fengmian's strength completely different from before. 66,000 drops of primordial war dragon blood essence. Chu Fengmian sensed the power contained in his battle dragon bloodline. This primordial battle dragon's blood essence was the true source of Chu Fengmian's power. Chu Fengmian now possessed almost half of the primordial war dragon's power. Vaguely, Chu Fengmian could feel that the distance between him and the completion of the first level of the battle dragon art was no longer so illusory. Chu Fengmian felt that as long as he reached the peak of the life and death steps, the immortal realm, he would be able to complete the first level of the battle dragon art. Chu Fengmian couldn't help but think of the time when he met Xing Xian in the pool. At that time, he was barely able to condense the first drop of primordial war dragon's blood essence. As for condensing all 129,600 drops of primordial war dragon's blood essence, it was simply illusory. Now, Chu Fengmian finally saw hope. With my current strength, it should be enough to subdue that young divine tree. Chu Fengmian stood up, his face already filled with confidence. For Chu Fengmian, who was at life and death realm back then, it was almost impossible to subdue this young divine tree. But this time, it was completely different. Chu Fengmian's figure moved and stood up. All the spirit stones and spirit herbs in front of him had been consumed. Chu Fengmian was now a pauper. But now that he could break through, it didn't matter even if he became a pauper. Now that Chu Fengmian's realm had increased, the speed at which his divine veins communicated with spiritual energy was also countless times faster than before. As long as Chu Fengmian was willing, he could condense countless spirit stones in the blink of an eye. With some time, he could accumulate enough wealth for the grand competition. Moreover, as long as he had power, wealth could be obtained at any time. There's actually a jade, dew, sacred fruit left. Chu Fengmian looked at the lonely jade, dew, sacred fruit in front of him. It was when he swallowed the last jade, dew, sacred fruit that he broke through the bottleneck in his body. Therefore, Chu Fengmian didn't devour this jade, dew, sacred fruit. Chu Fengmian glanced at it, then put it back into his spatial ring. Chong! Although the jade, dew, sacred fruit was useless to him, it was still very useful to other warriors. Chu Fengmian wouldn't give the desolate ancient sect a chance to become an old ancestor. Chu Fengmian disappeared from his spot and appeared in front of the young divine tree in the next moment. This time, when he felt the young divine tree's spiritual energy, Chu Fengmian was no longer as fearful as before. He could feel that the young divine tree's power was now on the same level as his. Suppress. Chu Fengmian condensed his spiritual energy and transformed it into a huge palm. He slammed it towards the young divine tree. Just like before, a layer of green spiritual energy appeared around the young divine tree. When Chu Fengmian came into contact with this layer of green spiritual energy, his body was smashed to pieces and he almost died. But this time, Chu Fengmian didn't panic at all. He pointed his finger, and a layer of green, spiritual energy shattered like a deflated balloon. Don't struggle. I've subdued you. In the future, you will follow me to the peak and even establish the glory of the desolate ancient sect. Surrender. Chu Fengmian said coldly. Waves of energy suppressed the young divine tree. The young divine tree was still very immature. It could only instinctively use its spiritual energy to condense green spiritual energy and attack Chu Fengmian. But this kind of attack was like a tickle to Chu Fengmian. It easily shattered all the green spiritual energy. After a few exchanges, the young divine tree's power was gradually depleted. Chapter 886. The young divine tree had just been born and needed the nourishment of the divine tree. How could it withstand such consumption? Under the suppression of Chu Fengmian's boundless spiritual energy, it gradually gave up resisting. Great! Seeing the young divine tree give up resisting, Chu Fengmian's face was filled with joy. He had been waiting for this moment. Chu Fengmian hurriedly condensed a wave of spiritual energy, turning it into a brand, and directly injected it into the young divine tree. On the heart of the young divine tree, Chu Fengmian's brand was firmly engraved on it. Damn it! Suddenly, a deafening sound resounded from the space within the divine tree. In an instant, an incomparably huge arm suddenly appeared in the air and abruptly bombarded Chu Fengmian with a palm. The power of this palm came crashing down from the sky, shattering the surrounding space completely. The target of this palm was none other than Chu Fengmian. A supreme expert had suddenly attacked Chu Fengmian. This young divine tree was most likely cultivated by this supreme expert. Now, Chu Fengmian rushed in front of him and actually subdued this young divine tree. How could this supreme expert not be angry? What kind of strength is this? The ultimate realm? Or even a ninth step of the life and death steps? The terrifying immortal realm expert? The moment Chu Fengmian felt this wave of spiritual energy bombarding him, his mind couldn't help but tremble. The power of this palm absolutely surpassed the strength of any expert that Chu Fengmian had seen in this life. It bombarded the air, and he didn't know how far it came from. However, the power of this bombardment was incomparably precise, and its only goal was to kill Chu Fengmian. Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage. Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword. Chu Fengmian didn't have any time to hesitate. The Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage and the Ancestral Dragon Supreme Sword were taken out by Chu Fengmian. On the Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage, the umbrella suddenly opened, and the seven-colored light turned into a barrier, blocking in front of Chu Fengmian. However, this almost indestructible seven-colored barrier was directly shattered by the power of this palm. The terrifying power of this palm was simply enough to crush everything. In front of this palm, Chu Fengmian's strength was extremely weak. Boom! The terrifying power of the palm hit Chu Fengmian's body on the spot. Chu Fengmian felt that his body was about to be torn apart by the power of this palm. It was as if his body was about to shatter. Invincible War Dragon. Condense. Chu Fengmian roared crazily. The power of the Battle Dragon bloodline started to boil in Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian's body, which was about to shatter, was reconstructed and restored. Under the power of the Battle Dragon bloodline, the torn wound healed immediately. Let's go. Chu Fengmian moved his body and suddenly turned into a beam of light. He gathered the power of creation and broke the barrier around the space. With a leap, he dashed out. The one who did this was definitely a supreme expert from the desolate ancient sect. He might even be an immortal realm expert. Just this palm alone was enough to seriously injure Chu Fengmian. Moreover, this was a palm strike that crossed thousands of miles in the air. Its true power was probably less than 50%. If he were to strike again, the consequences would be unimaginable. Tree of God. Chu Fengmian hurriedly called out to the young Tree of God. Suddenly, the young Tree of God was uprooted from the ground. It turned into a beam of light and entered Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian moved his body and directly jumped into the void from the space within the Tree of God. However, the moment Chu Fengmian stepped into the void, suddenly, Another wave of spiritual energy blasted over from the sky. This time, the power of this palm strike was many times more terrifying than the previous one. Obviously, this supreme expert had no intention of letting Chu Fengmian go. In order to cultivate this young tree of God, he had spent a lot of effort. It was a fruit that he had spent a lot of effort to cultivate. Now, Chu Fengmian was plucking it. His anger had reached its peak. The entire void could feel the anger of this supreme expert. Damn it! Damn it! Die, brat! Waves of furious roars swept across the void, stirring up countless gusts of wind and waves. Of course, this was not the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was the palm strike that blasted over again. The power of this palm strike was vividly displayed. It turned into an ocean of spiritual energy. It wanted to engulf Chu Fengmian's body with the enormous spiritual energy. Damn it! Breaking the firmament with a sword. Chu Fengmian suddenly pulled out his sword and gathered all his sword intent on the blade. The power of the 400 supreme sword cheese also merged into the sword edge. He directly faced the attack with his sword. He could not destroy the power of this palm strike. No matter where Chu Fengmian escaped to, he would be hunted down. Boom! Boom! A sword edge broke through the sea abruptly as the two forces collided violently in the void. The collision was so terrifying that no one knew how much of the void was broken. However, in the blink of an eye, the power of this sword was directly devoured. The power of this palm was simply like a vast ocean, endless and limitless. It seemed that no matter how hard he tried to resist, he could not resist it. Damn it! I don't believe that you can kill me. Invincible battle dragon. Bless all of them. The ancestral dragon's supreme sword, the battle dragon treasure carriage, and a mysterious black sword formation all turned into countless rays of light and integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. Ancient dragon emperor body. The power of the battle dragon bloodline burst out. It was as if all of Chu Fengmian's foundation had burst out and integrated into Chu Fengmian's body. Boom! Chu Fengmian's body was directly sucked into the sea of spiritual energy. He was almost constantly bombarded by the enormous power. Crack! Crack! Chu Fengmian's body was broken little by little. It was simply a matter of life and death. Boom! However, at this moment, a layer of green spiritual energy suddenly condensed on Chu Fengmian's body. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's body suddenly became incomparably tough. The countless injuries on Chu Fengmian's body were all healed in an instant. What's going on? Is this the power of the divine tree? At this most critical moment, the sudden appearance of the green spiritual energy suddenly alleviated Chu Fengmian's crisis. Chapter 887. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that the divine tree would suddenly burst out with such power and relieve the pressure on him. He saved Chu Fengmian's life. The moment the green spiritual energy appeared, Chu Fengmian felt that his body had become much tougher. The sea of spiritual energy wanted to tear Chu Fengmian's body apart, but it seemed to be powerless. Let's go. Chu Fengmian didn't hesitate and made a prompt decision. His body passed through countless voids and arrived at the 9 domains. With a thought, he communicated with the cloud, feather heavenly palace, and returned to it. The moment Chu Fengmian left the void and returned to the 9 domains, he could feel that a terrifying figure was chasing after him from the void. However, Chu Fengmian communicated with Cloud Feather Palace and returned there directly. As long as Chu Fengmian was in Cloud Feather Palace, no matter how powerful the figure was, he couldn't hurt Chu Fengmian. I'm safe. Back in Cloud Feather Palace, Chu Fengmian finally breathed a sigh of relief. Chu Fengmian came to a palace in Cloud Feather Palace and sat on the ground to rest. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that he would be hunted down by such a terrifying old antique. The old antique who had just chased after Chu Fengmian was probably an immortal realm expert. He was someone who had reached the end of the 9 steps of life and death. Such a figure was extremely terrifying. As long as he took one more step, he would surpass the 9 steps of life and death and be ranked at the top of the 9 domains. In the 7 major sects, such a figure was a real big shot and was extremely respected. He usually cultivated in seclusion and only appeared occasionally. Now, this old antique suddenly came out of seclusion and angrily attacked Chu Fengyan. It seemed that this young divine tree was deliberately cultivated by this old antique. His purpose should be the same as Chu Fengyan's, to wait for the divine tree to become independent and then subdue it. Therefore, he wanted to control the divine tree's power. He didn't expect that Chu Fengyan would take the first step and subdue the young divine tree. That was why the old antique was so angry. I'm really lucky this time. Chu Fengyan couldn't help but sigh. This time, he went to the divine tree's secret realm not only to break through the realm, but also to subdue the young divine tree. This was the greatest opportunity for Chu Fengyan, especially when he was in a desperate situation just now. It was the sudden burst of the divine tree's power that saved him. Now that he was out of danger, Chu Fengyan sat where he was and released his spiritual awareness to examine his own body. The moment the power of the divine tree burst out, Chu Fengyan felt that his body had suddenly become countless times tougher. Chu Fengyan was also very curious about what exactly had happened. When Chu Fengyan scanned his body with his spiritual awareness, he suddenly froze. He was even a little Fengyan find his body was in the deepest part of his body, around Chu Fengyan's natal sword origin. The young divine tree was actually planted in this body. Teeth, the S's head's God, his a divine's body's body, S's divines, S's ants divines. What's happening? This divine tree actually fused with my body? Chu Fengyan was extremely shocked. He never thought that something like this would happen. The divine tree had actually chosen to take root in Chu Fengyan's body and become one with him. After a short moment of shock, Chu Fengyan's face was filled with ecstasy. This was definitely the best thing that could happen. The reason why the Great Desolation was so tough in the past was because the roots of the creation tree covered the entire Great Desolation. Therefore, the primordial era shit was connected as one and was incomparably tough. Later on, it was also because the creation tree had shattered that the great primordial was forcefully shattered by martial artists. Now, the divine tree had taken root and sprouted from Chu Fengyan's body. Countless roots were scattered all over his body. The scattering of the countless roots made Chu Fengyan's body more than 10 times tougher than before. That was why Chu Fengyan was able to escape from the hands of such a big shot. Moreover, the power of the Tree of God was still extremely weak now. If the Tree of God were to grow in the future, when it grew, Chu Fengyan would be able to use the power of the divine tree to strengthen his body. This fleshly body could possibly grow to an incomparably terrifying level in the future. There were countless ways to strengthen the body, but which one was more terrifying than having a divine tree in one's body? Originally, I didn't know how to use the power of the divine tree. I didn't expect that the divine tree had already fused with my body. Chu Fengyan couldn't help but sigh. This time, it could be considered a blessing in disguise. It was beyond Chu Fengyan's estimation. The divine tree should have sensed danger when that big shot chased after Chu Fengyan. Therefore, the divine tree took the initiative to fuse with Chu Fengyan's body, which was a blessing in disguise. Chu Fengyan didn't expect that the big shot would chase after him and bring him such benefits. Going to the divine tree mystic realm this time, he had made a huge profit. Now that Chu Fengyan's body had fused with the divine tree, his body was 10 times or even dozens of times more terrifying than before. It should be noted that Chu Fengyan's body had been tempered countless times. He had been tempered by tribulation, lightning, and heavenly crystals, and he also had the bloodline of the war dragon and the body of the ancient dragon king. He was not inferior to those martial artists who cultivated the body. Now, with the support of the divine tree, he was even more powerful by dozens of times. At this moment, Chu Fengyan felt that just by relying on the strength of his physical body, he was strong enough to fight against a ruler of the destiny state and become one of them. With such a body, even an immortal realm big shot wouldn't be able to kill Chu Fengyan easily. Chu Fengyan had simply become an unkillable cockroach. Elder Yin? Why did Elder Yin suddenly disappear? After Chu Fengyan familiarized himself with the situation in his body, he suddenly felt a little strange. This time, when Chu Fengmian returned to the Cloud Feather Palace, Elder Yun, as the spirit of the palace, should have known and appeared early. However, this time, Elder Yun wasn't among them. Just as Chu Fengmian walked out of the palace and was about to look for Elder Yun suddenly appeared in front of him. However, when he looked at Elder Yun, he looked a little tired. Chapter 888. Young Master, you're back. Elder Yun said slowly when he saw Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian could hear the weakness in Elder Yun's voice. Elder Yun, what happened? Chu Fengmian asked decisively. The last time he saw Elder Yun, he was still full of spiritual energy. However, this time, Chu Fengmian could feel that Elder Yun's spiritual energy was extremely weak. Elder Yun was not a martial artist, but an artifact spirit of Yunyu Palace. The main body of Yunyu Palace was in the returning ruined sky, so there should not be any danger. However, Elder Yun's current weakness was obviously abnormal. Young Master, we encountered some trouble. Elder Yun did not intend to hide anything when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. A group of martial practitioners suddenly discovered the location of our Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. They want to take it for themselves. Although they won't be able to attack for a while, I have no way to recover my strength. As a result, the strength that they have consumed is getting weaker and weaker. I wanted to call you back, young master, but I didn't expect you to come back by yourself. A group of martial artists is attacking Yunyu Palace? Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with surprise when he heard Elder Yun's words. The returning ruined sky, where Yunyu Palace was located, only opened once every 3 years. The last time it opened, it had only been a few months. It was impossible for it to open again this time. Then where did these martial artists come from? Although Chu Fengmian wasn't sure if there were any more hidden martialists in the Sinkhole Sky, he knew that the Sinkhole Sky wasn't a place to be. However, it was impossible for them to attack the Cloud Feather Palace with just these hidden warriors. Chu Fengmian could feel Elder Yun's strength after he had broken through. This was the strength of an emperor. Elder Yun's strength was not inferior to that of an emperor. In the returning ruined sky, there should not be any martial artists who could threaten Elder Yun. However, Elder Yun was so weak now. It was obvious that the martial artists who attacked Yunyu Palace were not weak. It was even possible that a ruler had made a move, which was why Elder Yun was so weak. The Cloud Feather Palace was under the protection of Elder Yun. The most important thing now was for Elder Yun to recover his strength. Chu Fengmian waved his hand and used the power of his divine pulse to devour spiritual energy. Suddenly, countless royal-grade spirit stones appeared in front of him and piled up into a mountain. Elder Yun, you should refine these spiritual stones and recover your strength first. I'll go and see who dares to target Cloud Feather Palace. A cold glint flashed in Chu Fengmian's eyes. Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace was Chu Fengmian's main military camp. It was his escape route. Chu Fengmian felt that Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace was extremely safe because it was in Sinkhole Heavenly Palace. Chu Fengmian had never expected that someone would come to attack Cloud Feather Palace. Chu Fengmian had to find out who was attacking Cloud Feather Palace this time. Otherwise, it would become a hidden danger in the future. Young Master, these... Elder Yun was stunned when he saw the mountain of royal-grade spirit stones in front of him. Based on his experience, he naturally knew how huge the wealth was. He did not expect Chu Fengmian to be able to take out such a huge amount of wealth so casually. It's okay. Elder Yun, you could devour them all. You must recover your strength to protect Cloud Feather Palace. Chu Fengmian said with a smile. The mountain of spiritual stones was something that Chu Fengmian could condense with a wave of his hand. Chu Fengmian's strength was not what it used to be. His divine pulse devoured spiritual energy at a speed that was dozens of times faster than before. Spiritual stones were meaningless to Chu Fengmian. Okay, Elder Yun was shocked by Chu Fengmian's generosity, but after listening to Chu Fengmian's words, he nodded. He had been using his strength to fend off the attacks from outside. If he ran out of spiritual energy and allowed the martial artist to take the opportunity to rush in, it would be the greatest loss. Elder Yun devoured the spiritual stones and gradually recovered his strength. Chu Fengmian's body turned into a ray of light and flew toward the gate of Cloud Feather Palace. When he got close to the gate of Cloud Feather Palace, Chu Fengyan concealed his figure. As the master of Cloud Feather Palace, Chu Fengyan could naturally conceal his aura at will. Quietly, Chu Fengyan approached. There were hundreds of martial artists standing outside the gate of Cloud Feather Palace. Most of the martial artists were around the life and death realm. There were dozens of people who had surpassed the life and death realm. The two strongest among them were emperors of the destiny realm, the seventh step of the life and death steps. These two emperors were the leaders of this group of martial artists. It's impossible for there to be so many hidden experts in Sinkhole Heaven. Looking at these people, Chu Fengyan felt that they were definitely not the martial artists who had stayed in Sinkhole Heaven. Chu Fengyan knew that there were still some martial artists who had stayed in Sinkhole Heaven. However, most of these people were weak. Even if there were some forces, there would only be dozens of people at most. It was impossible for hundreds of martial artists to appear together like this. These martial artists obviously belonged to the same force. Their status was strict, and they were all guarded by the two emperors. War Demon, Cloud Feather Palace is like a tortoise shell. We have been bombarding it for a month without breaking it. Are we still going to waste time here? One of the emperors said impatiently as he watched the martial artists bombarding Cloud Feather Palace again and again. There are treasures everywhere in Sinkhole Heaven. We shouldn't waste our time on this tortoise shell. The seven great sects don't know that we have sneaked into Sinkhole Heaven. We should collect more treasures here. The Sovereign Lord looked extremely young. From what Chu Fengyan could see, the Sovereign Lord was not even 100 years old. An emperor who was not even 100 years old? What did that mean? Only a genius who had been nurtured by the seven great sects since childhood could reach this level. In the entire 9 regions, this kind of talent could be described as monstrous. The emperor next to him also looked very young. They were both less than 100 years old and had stepped into the ranks of emperors. The appearance of these two emperors was enough to cause a stir in the 9 regions. Chapter 889. The birth of 2 genius sovereigns was definitely enough to cause a stir in the 9 regions. However, Chu Fengyan had never heard of this matter. These people actually had their eyes on the return to ruined sky. It seemed that they had deceived the spies of the 7 major sects and entered the return to ruined sky with a unique identity. They were here to frantically plunder the treasures of the return to ruined sky. In the return to ruined sky, other than Chu Fengyan, the strongest martial artists were at most around the strength of an ordinary great ancestor. In front of these people, they were simply incomparably weak. This group of people came to the return to ruined sky and killed anyone who stood in their way. Along the way, who knew how many martial artists they had killed and how many treasures they had seized. It seems that this group of people must have obtained a legacy like the Cloud Feather Palace to be able to bring so many people to the return to ruined sky. Chu Fengyan thought to himself, now that he had the Cloud Feather Palace, he could return to the return to ruined sky from the 9 regions at any time. Now, it seemed that these martial artists were very likely like Chu Fengyan. Someone had brought them over. It seemed that Chu Fengyan was not the only martial artist who had obtained treasures in the return to ruined sky. Originally, Chu Fengyan wanted to wait until he was stronger before coming to the return to ruined sky to search for treasures. He did not expect that this group of people would be the first to come. Fortunately, Chu Fengyan had rushed back. Otherwise, if this group of people had attacked the Cloud Feather Palace, it would have been very dangerous. Not only would the Cloud Feather Palace be in danger, but Han Li, who was cultivating in the Cloud Feather Palace, would also be in great danger. I wonder where this group of people came from. If there were only 2 sovereigns, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with them. However, there might be other experts hiding behind this group of people. Chu Fengyan thought to himself as he observed the martial artists' actions. Since this group of people could enter the return to ruined sky without being noticed by the 7 major sects, they must be hiding something behind them. Chu Fengyan didn't intend to act rashly. Instead, he waited on the side and listened to the conversations of these warriors. Duomo, don't complain. This is the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. Back then, the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace was an existence that dominated the 9 regions. Obtaining the treasures of the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace is much more useful than obtaining the treasures of 100 small sections. The emperor known as the War Demon smiled when he heard Dumo's words. There's no need to worry. The defenses of the Cloud Feather Palace are getting weaker and weaker. Even if the Cloud Feather Palace was once glorious, it's now in ruins. I like to see how long it can last. Then, the War Devil coldly looked at the barrier above Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. The Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace was no longer as powerful as it had been in the past. It didn't seem like it would be long before it was destroyed. However, Chu Fumian wasn't worried at all. He had already left countless spirit stones to Elder Yun. After devouring these spirit stones, Elder Yun's strength would recover by quite a bit. However, the way they addressed this group of martial artists made Chu Fumian recall their origins in an instant. Dumo, War Demon. Could these names be the code names of the War Demon sect and the Lone Demon sect? Dumo, War Demon. Could this group of people be from the Six Paths Demon sect? Chu Fumian's eyes flickered. His spiritual consciousness quietly approached them. Although the cultivation techniques of this group of cultivators looked no different from those of ordinary cultivators, the cultivation techniques of this group of cultivators were different from ordinary cultivators. However, when Chu Fumian approached them, he discovered them at a glance. This was merely a disguise. Behind the camouflage of these martialists, every one of them cultivated an extremely profound demonic art. They are indeed from the Six Paths Demon sect. At this moment, Chu Fumian understood the identities of these people. Among the 9 regions, only the Six Paths Demon sect could possibly have such a group of mysterious warriors. These 2 sovereigns should be the War Demon Supremacy and Dumo Supremacy, the 2 supremacies of the Six Paths Demon sect. The status of these 2 sovereigns was clearly superior to all the other patriarchs. Their status in the Six Paths Demon sect should be extremely high. At the very least, they were 2 supremacies. I didn't expect the Six Paths Demon sect to come to the returning ruins sky this time. Chu Fumian's eyes were extremely cold. The Six Paths Demon sect. Chu Fumian didn't have a good impression of the Six Paths Demon sect, but there was no enmity between them. Normally, even if he encountered them, Chu Fumian couldn't be bothered to make a fuss about it. He didn't expect the Six Paths Demon sect to target him this time. Let's see if there's anyone else hiding behind these people. Chu Fumian's figure flashed and disappeared. His aura was undetectable as he turned into a gust of wind and arrived beside the Six Paths Demon sect's patriarchs. Chu Fumian didn't know how much power the Six Paths Demon sect had hidden this time. However, it was clear that the 2 supremacies weren't easy to deal with. The supremacies of the Six Paths Demon sect had experienced the inheritance of the Six Paths Demon sect. They had always been invincible among martial artists in the same realm. At the very least, the 2 sovereigns in front of Chu Fumian were more terrifying than all the sovereigns in the Heaven's Mandate realm that Chu Fumian had met. Apart from the 6 supremacies, the Six Paths Demon sect also had the most mysterious demon emperor. Chu Fumian wanted to find out the current situation of the Six Paths Demon sect. He quietly moved closer and heard the conversation between the patriarchs and the 2 supremacies. What's going on? Why is the barrier of the Cloud Feather Palace getting stronger? Just as the barrier of the Cloud Feather Palace was about to be broken by the patriarchs of the Six Paths Demon sect, all of a sudden, the weakened power of the Cloud Feather Palace started to rise. The barrier above was already on the verge of collapse. It was on the verge of shattering, but it had also been reformed. It's just a spiritual weapon. How can it recover spiritual energy? One of the patriarchs said, in surprise. Don't worry about it. Continue to attack. The Cloud Feather Palace used to be a sect that dominated the 9 regions. The artifact spirit has some unique means. Don't worry about it. Dumo's supremacy sneered with greed in his eyes. The Holy Emperor is now in seclusion. We can give the Cloud Feather Palace to the Holy Emperor as a gift when he comes out of seclusion. All of you will be rewarded. Chapter 890. Reward. Upon hearing Venerable Dumo's words, the ancestors of the 6 demon sects became excited. When the sacred emperor was mentioned, almost all the patriarchs were filled with reverence and respect. The force attacking Cloud Feather Palace was growing stronger and stronger. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian had left a large number of spiritual stones for Elder Yin. Even under such a bombardment, the barrier of Cloud Feather Palace was still indestructible. It seems like the Demon Emperor is not in the returning ruined sky. Chu Fengmian heaved a sigh of relief after listening to the conversation between the 6 demon sects. The Demon Emperor's absence was good news for Chu Fengmian. At least, he did not have to worry about the Demon Emperor's existence. Chu Fengmian's eyes flickered. There was already a hint of killing intent in his eyes. Although Chu Fengmian did not want to provoke the 6 demon sects, the 6 demon sects had delivered themselves to his doorstep. Chu Fengmian did not want to provoke them, but it did not mean that he was afraid of them. It seems like these people have already collected a large number of treasures in the returning ruined sky. Very well. It seems like their treasures will all belong to me. Chu Fengmian's body moved and disappeared from the spot. With a thought from Chu Fengmian, the doors of the Cloud Feather Palace slowly opened. It's open. The gate of Cloud Feather Palace is open. Countless ancestors of the 6 demon sects cried out in surprise. Their faces were filled with joy. They had been bombarding the palace for a whole month. The gate of Cloud Feather Palace was finally open. It seemed like the countless treasures inside were now at their fingertips. Charge! A few ancestors of the life and death realm were the first to make a move. They turned into countless streaks of light and rushed into the gate of Cloud Feather Palace. However, just as they were about to enter the Cloud Feather Sky Palace, a voice suddenly rang out. Suddenly, a huge amount of spiritual energy burst out from within, killing the old ancestor and the 7 or 8 life and death realm martial artists. Stomp! Stomp! A figure slowly walked out of Cloud Feather Palace. It was Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's face was expressionless as he swept his cold gaze across all the warriors present. It was as if he was looking at a group of dead people. Since someone had set their sights on the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace, Chu Fengmian decided to kill them all and let others know the consequences of having designs on the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. What happened? Someone's here. Seeing the gates of the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace open, the cultivators of the 6 Paths Demon Gates were extremely excited. Unexpectedly, the cultivators who had just stepped in were all killed. Then, a figure suddenly walked out from the crowd. There were actually martial artists in the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. Everyone, get out of the returning ruins heaven. You can never set foot here again. Otherwise, all of you will die. Chu Fengmian said coldly. This was his first warning, and it was also his only warning. What? What arrogance! One of the patriarchs stepped back in shock. Then, he glanced at Chu Fengmian and said with a ferocious expression, I was wondering what kind of person he was. It turns out that he's just an immortal realm brat. How dare he speak so arrogantly with such strength? 2 supremacies, I'll capture this brat and hand him over to you. How dare a puny immortal realm patriarch make an enemy of the 6 Paths Demon Gates? What a joke. The patriarch who spoke shouted angrily. At the same time, he rushed toward Chu Fengmian. The patriarch's strength was at the 6th step of the life and death steps, the heart refining realm. Because of this, the patriarch did not take Chu Fengmian, an immortal realm cultivator, seriously at all. Boom! A chain suddenly appeared in the patriarch's hand. The chain struck and grabbed at Chu Fengmian. It wanted to lock Chu Fengmian's body and capture him. Oof! Chu Fengmian stood in front of the Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace. Seeing the chain flying toward him, killing intent flashed in his eyes. Chu Fengmian suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed at the space in front of him. The chain was caught by Chu Fengmian's hand. Then, with a sudden tug, Chu Fengmian grabbed the old ancestor's body along with the iron chain in his hand. I've given you a chance. Since you don't know how to cherish it, you can die. Chu Fengmian's voice was extremely cold and filled with killing intent. Oh no, brat, let him go. Seeing the patriarch in Chu Fengmian's hand, the other cultivators' faces changed and they shouted loudly. If you don't let him go, you'll die today. Kill. Anyone who dares to go against the 6 Paths Demon Gates will die. The threats were constantly transmitted to Chu Fengmian's ears. Even several patriarchs attacked Chu Fengmian one after another. They wanted to save him from Chu Fengmian's hands. However, when Chu Fengmian heard these threats, the murderous intent on his face grew even stronger. Very well. Since you all want to die, I'll fulfill your wishes. Who was Chu Fengmian? Chu Fengmian had never taken the threat of the seven sects seriously, not to mention the six paths demon gates, which had already been destroyed. Boom! Chu Fengmian exerted some force in his palm and crushed the patriarch to death right away. The blood mist and the countless spiritual stones on his body were all devoured by Chu Fengmian. The chain spiritual weapon was also taken by Chu Fengmian. He threw it into the mysterious black sword formation, and it was devoured by the mysterious black sword formation. And you all. After killing the patriarch, Chu Fengmian looked at the other patriarchs who had attacked him. He condensed a stream of spiritual energy on his fist and punched out. It turned into a huge primordial war dragon. Screams were heard as the ancient war dragon opened its mouth and devoured all of the ancestors. Almost in an instant, the patriarchs who had just attacked were all devoured by the primordial war dragon. All the blood essence was refined by Chu Fengmian and turned into pure spiritual energy for him to devour. More than half of the patriarchs of the six paths demon gates had died in Chu Fengmian's hands. The speed of his attack was too fast. Even the patriarchs had just reacted and retreated abruptly. Their faces were filled with horror. Who is this guy? How can an immortality realm kid be so powerful? Countless patriarchs' eyes were filled with fear. They looked at each other, but no one dared to attack. Chapter 891. Chu Fengmian was only in the immortal realm. Almost every old ancestor present was in a higher realm than Chu Fengmian. A few of them had even reached the heart-tempering realm. They were only a step away from the emperor realm. Therefore, when they saw Chu Fengmian, they did not think highly of him. They thought that Chu Fengmian was someone they could easily bully. Who would have thought that Chu Fengmian would be able to kill all of those patriarchs so easily in the blink of an eye? He killed them in one move. This kind of strength was simply something that only a ruler could possess. An immortal-level warrior actually had the strength of an emperor. How is this possible? Who are you, kid? One of the two supremacies, the war demon supremacy, looked at Chu Fengmian and sneered. I don't think there is a kid like you in the 7 major sections. Tell me, where did you come from? Looking at you, it seems like you're the owner of Cloud Feather Palace. Very well, give us Cloud Feather Palace, kneel down, and become a slave of the Six Paths Demon Sect. Only then will we forgive your sins. The war demon supremacy was high and mighty. When he spoke, he did not think highly of Chu Fengmian. To an emperor realm expert, even the strongest old ancestor was just an ant. Moreover, the war demon supremacy was not an ordinary emperor realm expert. He was a supremacy of a Six Paths Demon Sect. In his opinion, his willingness to talk to Chu Fengmian and give him a way out was already a great gift. Chu Fengmian would definitely kneel down obediently and hand over Cloud Feather Palace. How could an old ancestor choose to resist in front of 2 emperors? He would be digging his own grave. The battle demon supremacy was looking at Chu Fengmian from above, waiting for him to kneel down. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a mocking smile. It seems like not everyone in the Six Paths Demon Sect has brains. At least, you don't. This Cloud Feather Heavenly Palace does indeed belong to me. However, if you wish to obtain it, it's very simple. All you have to do is kill me, and you will be able to obtain it. Chu Fengmian coldly glanced at everyone present and said word by word, I'm afraid that you all don't have the ability to do so. The fighting demon supremacy's face stiffened. The arrogant smile on his face disappeared and was replaced by an extremely cold expression. Very good. One arrogant brat. You don't have the ability? In this world, there is nothing that the Six Paths Demon Gate cannot obtain. Kid, even if you obediently kneel down and submit now, you won't have a chance. I will let you taste all the pain in the world and let you die in torment. The battle demon supremacy's voice was filled with killing intent. It was as if an ant dared to refuse the command of an elephant. A great ancestor actually dared to refuse a ruler's order? This kind of behavior was simply courting death. Die for me. The battle demon supremacy's body instantly turned blood red. Although they were unable to use their flying lights in the sky feather deity domain, the sky feather deity domain was still extremely dangerous. However, the speed of his identity had already surpassed countless patriarchs. Almost in an instant, the battle demon supremacy rushed to Chu Fengmian's front. Boundless blood chi soared into the sky from his body, and the surroundings were filled with the terrifying stench of blood. Battle demon god fist. The battle demon supremacy's body expanded countless times with the help of the blood chi. It was at least 10 times stronger than what it looked like just now. The power of this move was enough to unleash 10 times the strength of a ruler. Even other martial artists would find it difficult to resist the power of this punch. 10 times the strength of a ruler? Chu Fengmian's expression did not change as he faced the battle demon supremacy's punch. He even deliberately withdrew all of his spiritual energy. Similarly, he threw a punch at the battle demon supremacy. This punch did not use any spiritual energy. Instead, he used his physical strength to contend with the battle demon supremacy. What? Is this brat crazy? Could it be that he knows that he is going to die? Is he not going to resist? The martial artists of the six-path demon sects were shocked by Chu Fengmian's action. Chu Fengmian actually withdrew his spiritual energy in the face of an emperor? What was the difference between this action and suicide? Even an emperor would not dare to withdraw his spiritual energy in order to resist the battle demon supremacy's punch. Moreover, Chu Fengmian was only in the immortal realm. Even the battle demon supremacy was stunned when he saw Chu Fengmian's action. Then he laughed wildly. I thought you had some strength after being arrogant for so long. I didn't expect that you were just showing off. Die! The battle demon supremacy laughed. He looked at Chu Fengmian as if he was looking at a dead man. An immortal realm patriarch dared to withdraw his spiritual energy and resist his punch with his physical strength. This action was no different from suicide. The battle demon supremacy sneered as he imagined Chu Fengmian's body being blasted apart in front of him. Is that so? The moment the two fists collided, Chu Fengmian sneered. Boom! An incomparably terrifying power erupted from the two punches. This power was so strong that it forced countless warriors from the six demon sects to retreat. The power contained in the center of this power was extremely terrifying. This enormous power seemed to have broken the surrounding space and turned it into layers of turbulence. Any patriarch who was caught in the center of this power would definitely die. He's dead. That brat will definitely die under this power. The warriors from the six demon sects looked at the center of the collision in disgust. However, in the next moment, a sudden scream caused their discussion to stop abruptly. A figure was sent flying out from the center of the explosion. This figure was not Chu Fengmian, but the battle demon supremacy. The battle demon supremacy let out a blood-curdling scream as he was sent flying. A huge fist mark could be clearly seen on his chest. This fist mark seemed to have hit the battle demon supremacy's chest just now. What? No one present would have thought that the person who was sent flying was the battle demon supremacy. His body flew for a few dozen li before it came to a stop after crashing into a mountain. He spat out a copious amount of blood from his mouth. It could be said that he was in an extremely sorry state. Chapter 892. Not bad, not bad. Chu Fengmian slowly walked out from the center of the bombardment. A hint of joy could be seen on his face. He had fought against the battle demon supremacy with his physical body because he wanted to see how strong Chu Fengmian's body had become. Although Chu Fengmian could vaguely sense that his body had become dozens of times stronger than before after fusing with the divine tree, he still couldn't shake off the feeling. It should be known that Chu Fengmian's physical body had been tempered countless times. It was much stronger than warriors of the same realm. After merging with the divine tree, his body had grown to an astonishing level. At the very least, Chu Fengmian could have easily crushed the battle demon supremacy's punch with 10 times the strength of an emperor. This was Chu Fengmian's praise for his physical body. How is this possible? The arrogant smiles on the faces of the six-paths demon sect martial artists froze at this moment. They were all shocked. They saw Chu Fengmian slowly walking out from the center of the attack. Compared to the battle demon supremacy, who was in a sorry state, Chu Fengmian's body was completely unharmed. Chu Fengmian was the one who emerged victorious in the battle between the two. An immortal-level great ancestor restrained his spiritual power and fought against a ruler with his physical body. Yet, he still won a complete victory? The other supremacy, lone demon supremacy, never expected Chu Fengmian's strength to reach such a level. Although the combat demon supremacy hadn't used his strongest move, the tenfold increase in combat strength was still a killer move. The power of the Emperor bombarded Chu Fengmian's body. But now it could not hurt Chu Fengmian. In fact, Chu Fengmian had accomplished all of this with only the power of his physical body. An immortal-level great ancestor was able to defeat a ruler with the power of his physical body. This was simply beyond everyone's understanding. Even the countless geniuses in the records of the Six Paths Demon Gates were unable to do so. Chu Fengmian? You're Chu Fengmian? Lone Demon Supremacy shouted suddenly. There shouldn't have been such a monstrous genius in the 9 regions. If one were to say that he was a new monstrous genius in the 9 regions. If Chu Fengmian said he was second, no one would dare to say they were first. It seems that you've recognized my identity. Chu Fengmian smiled when Supremacy Du Mo revealed his identity. It seemed that his identity was easy to guess. He heard Chu Fengmian call himself Chu Mao. Lone Demon Supremacy confirmed that the young man in front of him was Chu Fengmian. However, when Chu Fengmian had displayed his monstrous strength, Lone Demon Supremacy hadn't dared to confirm it. According to the rumors, Chu Fengmian should only be in the life and death realm. Previously, Chu Fengmian had also met the Charm Demon Sovereign, Luo Shi. At that time, Chu Fengmian's strength was only enough to contend against a heart-refining realm ancestor. Facing a ruler, they were almost powerless to fight back. Now, in less than a month, Chu Fengmian had gained such strength. Chu Fengmian could defeat a ruler just by relying on his physical strength alone. This was no longer something that could be described as monstrous or genius. He was simply a monster, especially when Chu Fengmian was only in the immortal realm. If Chu Fengmian became an emperor, how terrifying would his strength be? So young Master Chu is the master of Cloud Feather Palace. We've been presumptuous. Lone Demon Supremacy's tone suddenly changed. His previous arrogance and killing intent had already disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a calm tone. Our Saint Emperor has been friends with young Master Chu for a long time. He specially instructed us to treat young Master Chu with respect. This time, we've disturbed young Master Chu's cultivation. It's our fault. We'll take our leave now. After Lone Demon Sovereign finished speaking, he gave a signal to all the ancestors present. Let's go. You've been friends with him for a long time, and you're treating him with respect? I'm afraid that your Demon Emperor has already issued a kill order for me. After hearing Lone Demon Supremacy's words, Chu Fengmian's face was filled with disdain. He had already given these people a chance to leave. If they didn't leave at that time, they wouldn't be able to leave alive now. You want to leave? Stay. Chu Fengmian's mind moved, and the power of Cloud Feather Palace enveloped them. The surrounding space was completely sealed off. Young Master Chu, what do you mean? Lone Demon Supremacy looked at Chu Fengmian and pretended to be puzzled. I've already given you a chance. Since you didn't leave at that time, there's no need for you to leave now. Chu Fengmian sneered. If I don't teach you a lesson, it seems like the Six Paths Demon sect won't learn their lesson. Boom! Chu Fengmian waved his hand, and a few of the Six Paths Demon sect's cultivators who wanted to escape died in front of Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian clenched his hand and crushed all of them. Chu Fengmian had already decided to kill these people to teach the Six Paths Demon sect a lesson. Don't provoke Chu Fengmian. A few of the Six Paths Demon sect's cultivators died in front of him. Lone Demon Supremacy could no longer keep up the pretense. The supremacies of the Six Paths Demon sect were all lawless and arrogant. They had already reached the limit of what they could do in front of Chu Fengmian. Now, Chu Fengmian had killed them in front of him. If he could tolerate this, he wouldn't be worthy of being an emperor. Damn it, Chu Fengmian, don't go too far. Do you really think that you're invincible? Everyone kill him. Demo's supremacy no longer concealed his murderous intent. Instead, he let it all out. These waves of killing intent were simply terrifying to the extreme. All of a sudden, all of them were displayed. Layers of killing intent shrouded Chu Fengmian. He was furious. With lone demon supremacy's dignity, watching Chu Fengmian kill the cultivators of the Six Paths demon sect in front of him was an insult to him. Fighting the world alone. Boom, boom. Lone demon supremacy threw out 20 punches. His strength was 20 times that of an emperor's. Kid, go to hell. The battle demon supremacy also appeared at this moment. He also unleashed countless martial skills at Chu Fengmian. Being sent flying by Chu Fengmian's punch was the greatest humiliation in the battle demon supremacy's life. He had never suffered such humiliation in his life. If he didn't kill Chu Fengmian, this humiliation would always be with him, making him feel endless humiliation at every moment. Chapter 893. The two martial highnesses attacked, all of a sudden. The martial skills they executed were extremely obscure. In an instant, they unleashed 20 times the power of an emperor. Even the 7 great sects might not possess such a terrifying martial skill. The two of them joined hands and unleashed countless martial techniques. It was as if they were going to destroy the world. Even an emperor would find it difficult to resist the power of 20 times the power of an emperor. He would be easily killed. In the same realm, they were simply invincible emperors. People like Emperor Yi and Emperor Yang could only flee in panic when they saw the two of them. However, Chu Fengmian only sneered disdainfully at the mysterious martial techniques that the two of them used. The two supremes were furious when they saw Chu Fengmian sneer. Chu Fengmian, you will die today. The two of them unleashed their ultimate killing moves. They did not give Chu Fengmian any chance to retaliate. They wanted to kill Chu Fengmian at this moment. Chu Fengmian was only in the immortal realm. He had yet to grow. Now was the best time to kill Chu Fengmian. If Chu Fengmian grew stronger, he would be able to stand on equal footing with them. At that time, it would be impossible for them to kill Chu Fengmian. Now was the best chance. Chu Fengmian could clearly feel the killing intent of the two supremes. However, there was a hint of contempt at the corner of Chu Fengmian's mouth. What? You want to fight against me with just 2 rulers? The martial techniques of the Six Paths demon sect are indeed good. Unfortunately, they are nothing in front of me. As Chu Fengmian spoke, the ancestral dragon supreme sword suddenly appeared in his hand. Waves of sword intent suddenly burst out from Chu Fengmian's body. With the support of the sword intent, the power of the ancestral dragon supreme sword seemed to have increased countless times in an instant. Chu Fengmian had already stepped onto the life and death steps. No matter how strong he was, he could unleash the true power of the ancestral dragon supreme sword. Break! Chu Fengmian's sword flashed and suddenly slashed out. It collided with the power of the two supremes in the air. Boom! The power unleashed by the war demon supremacy and the lone demon supremacy was instantly destroyed by Chu Fengmian's sword. All of the spiritual energy was easily dissolved on the spot. Given Chu Fengmian's current strength, even a ruler like him could only be suppressed by him. Chu Fengmian had previously felt that as long as he could step onto the life and death steps, he would be able to easily resist a ruler. Now, Chu Fengmian had a fortuitous encounter in the divine tree secret realm. He obtained the divine tree and integrated it into his body. Chu Fengmian's current strength was far greater than what he had imagined. The supreme killing moves of the two High Lords were easily neutralized by Chu Fengmian. Unscathed. Heavens, is this kid still human? Seeing that Chu Fengmian was almost unharmed, the two High Lords were incomparably shocked. The supreme killing moves of the two High Lords were not enough to deal with an immortal realm old ancestor. Even if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance of survival, it was enough to kill an emperor. Even if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance of survival, the emperor would still be severely injured. However, Their supreme killing moves were so powerless in front of Chu Fengmian. They were easily neutralized by Chu Fengmian. This kind of strength was simply beyond the imagination of the two High Lords. The two of you dared to attack Cloud Feather Palace. Today, both of you will die as punishment. Chu Fengmian sneered and directly attacked. His left hand moved and condensed into an incomparably huge dragon claw in the air. He slammed it down. Calamity Halberd. Suddenly, an ancient halberd appeared in the palm of Fighting Demon Supremacy's hand. The moment the ancient halberd appeared, the surrounding space seemed to have become incomparably chaotic. The halberd was waved, and an extremely terrifying force enveloped the space. It stirred up the living beings and directly collided with the incomparably huge dragon claw. At the moment of collision, the halberd actually forced the dragon claw back. The moment the ancient halberd appeared, Fighting Demon Supremacy's strength suddenly increased by several times. This is the supreme treasure of the ancient Calamity sect, the Calamity Halberd. Chu Fengmian stared at the ancient halberd and suddenly recognized the halberd. The Calamity sect was also one of the great sects in the ancient era. Although it was not as powerful as Cloud Feather Palace, it was enough to be considered an overlord force. The Calamity Halberd was the supreme treasure of the Calamity sect. Chu Fengmian had only heard of the existence of the Calamity sect from ancient records because he had never seen the existence of the Calamity sect in the entire 9 regions. He did not expect that the Calamity Halberd would fall into the hands of Fighting Demon Supremacy. Not bad. I didn't expect you to be so knowledgeable. Do you think the strength of the supremacies of the Six Paths Demon sect is only so? Holding the Calamity Halberd, Fighting Demon Supremacy looked at Chu Fengmian and sneered. The Calamity Halberd was the supreme treasure he had found in the returning ruined sky. Although it was not as good as the Ancestral Dragon's Supreme Sword, it was still a famous spiritual artifact. It was comparable to Chu Fengmian's Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage. Chu Fengmian, I admit that your strength is beyond our imagination. However, no matter how strong you are, you will not be able to escape death today. Lone Demon Supremacy looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly. An ancient, long saber spiritual artifact suddenly appeared in his hand. It was the Wind Saber. This was also a spirit tool that was somewhat famous in ancient times. It was not inferior to a spirit tool like the Battle Dragon Treasure Carriage. The Holy Emperor sees you as a threat. Today, we will kill you and offer your head to the Holy Emperor. Lone Demon Supremacy shouted loudly. Don't talk nonsense with him. Kill him. Boom. A saber and a halberd attacked Chu Fengmian at the same time. The saber and halberd were both heaven-grade spiritual artifact from the ancient era. In the hands of the two supremacies, the power they unleashed was extremely terrifying. In an instant, the spiritual energy in the sky formed a huge net and shrouded Chu Fengmian. The sharpness of the net was comparable to a heaven-grade spiritual artifact's blade. No one dared to touch it. These two spiritual artifacts were their trump cards. This time, they had used all their trump cards. They had decided to bury Chu Fengmian here today. Chapter 894. Not bad. Looks like you've obtained a lot of treasures in Sinkhole Heaven. Very well, these treasures will all belong to me now. Chu Fengmian laughed loudly. Countless dragon scales appeared on his body, strengthening his body. Chu Fengmian abruptly waved his hand, and his right hand directly grabbed at the spiritual energy net. The net was as sharp as a heaven-grade spiritual artifact's blade. However, Chu Fengmian's physical body was no less than a heaven-grade spiritual artifact. Crack! Chu Fengmian's hand grabbed at the spiritual energy net. Waves of spiritual energy collided and exploded all of a sudden. A few shallow blood scars appeared on Chu Fengmian's fingers, but with Chu Fengmian's terrifying recovery ability, these scars were all healed in an instant. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's hand tightened. In Chu Fengmian's hands, the net of spiritual power was torn apart by his bare hands. Chu Fengmian was able to tear it apart with his bare hands. Dying. Before the two supremacies could react, Chu Fengmian attacked again. His left hand transformed into a gigantic war dragon's claw, which suddenly struck towards the two of them. Bam! The bodies of these two people were directly blasted away by this surge of spiritual energy. They were sent flying dozens of miles away. Both of them coughed up a copious amount of blood. The Calamity Halberd and the Windbreaker Saber flew out of their hands as well. Whoosh! With a thought, Chu Fengmian used his spiritual energy to control the two spiritual weapons and grab them in his hand. Not bad. These two spiritual artifacts can be used to cultivate my black, profound sword formation. Sword formation, come out. The black, profound sword formation, formed by 100,000 spiritual swords, was suddenly unsheathed from Chu Fengmian's body. The two spiritual weapons were surrounded tightly. Then, they were devoured and refined by the black, mysterious sword formation. Are you two still trying to escape? At this moment, the two Supremes suddenly stood up and turned into two streaks of light, as though they were trying to escape. However, in the Heavenly Feather Divine territory, Chu Fengmian was the supreme ruler. A golden light was emitted from Chu Fengmian's forehead. Under his control, the entire space of the Heavenly Feather Divine territory was completely sealed. The two supremacies could not escape from the Heavenly Feather Divine territory, even if they gave it their all. Chu Fengmian, what are you doing? Do you really want to fall out with the Sixth Demon Gate? Lone Demon Supremacy and Fighting Demon Supremacy looked at Chu Fengmian and shouted. The two of them could also sense that the entire space of the Heavenly Feather Divine territory had been sealed by Chu Fengmian using some sort of technique. Chu Fengmian, no matter how strong you are, it's impossible for you to fight against the Sixth Dao Demon Gate alone. If you dare to kill us today, you'll be hunted down by the Sixth Dao Demon Gate. Battle Demon Supremacy said coldly as he looked at Chu Fengmian. If you let us go now, we can still talk. Your enemy is the Seven Great Sects, and our enemy is also the Seven Great Sections. When the time comes, it is not impossible for us to cooperate. There is no need to shed all pretense of cordiality. Fighting Demon Supremacy's eyes flickered as he spoke. He seemed to be thinking about something. Hunted by the Sixth Demon Gate? I'm not even afraid of the seven major sections. Why should I be afraid of the Sixth Demon Gate? Chu Fengmian shook his head and said in an incomparably cold voice, You dare to attack the Cloud Feather Palace. That's an unforgivable crime. Now you want to threaten me? So what if we fall out? The Sixth Demon Gate is not qualified to cooperate with me. Also, you don't need to stall for time. Don't worry, I won't give you the chance to do so. Chu Fengmian made a move as he spoke. His spiritual energy gathered in his palm and turned into a huge battle dragon claw. It fell mercilessly from the sky. Chu Fengmian could see through Fighting Demon Supremacy's actions. He was trying to stall for time. Chu Fengmian also knew who Fighting Demon Supremacy was waiting for. There is only one person in the six demonic sects who could make him wait for reinforcements to arrive. It was the Demon Emperor of the Six Demon Gates. Chu Fengmian didn't want to start a conflict with the Demon Emperor before he figured out his strength. Now, he had to kill the two of them first to avoid any more trouble. Damn it! When the Battle Demon Supremacy heard Chu Fengmian's words, he understood that Chu Fengmian had seen through his plan to stall for time. Kill! We'll fight to the death. The Six Demon Gates will never lose. Lone Demon Supremacy roared crazily as his body began to swell. In front of the surges of spiritual energy, he suddenly became incomparably huge. His skin also became rough, and purple scales could be clearly seen on his skin. A purple horn suddenly appeared on the top of his head. Demon Transformation. This was the supreme secret technique of the Six Demon Gates. It allowed one to transform into a demon. Once a martial artist of the Six Demon Gates underwent demon transformation, his strength would increase by several folds. However, it was the same as Chu Fengmian's dragon transformation. Although it was enough to unleash a terrifying power, there was a hidden danger. Once a martial artist of the Six Demon Gates couldn't control this demonic power, he would turn into a demon and become a madman who only knew how to kill. Therefore, the martial artists of the Six Demon Gates wouldn't use this technique unless they had no other choice. Under Chu Fengmian's coercion, Lone Devil Supremacy decided to go all out. He didn't care about anything else and attacked Chu Fumian directly. As long as he could stall for time until the Demon Emperor of the 6 Demon Gates arrived, Chu Fumian would die. Die, brat. Boom. Lone Demon Supremacy suddenly rushed towards Chu Fumian. His speed was many times faster than before he transformed into a demon. At first glance, it was merely a purple escape, light approaching Chu Fumian. Even an Emperor Realm expert wouldn't be able to see Lone Demon Supremacy's speed. However, Chu Fumian stood on the same spot without any change in his expression. Demon transformation? It was impossible to use such a method to deal with Chu Fumian even if he wanted to fight to the death. Die! Chu Fumian gathered all his strength and condensed it on his left hand. The Battle Dragon Claw was condensed again. In the air, it turned into the claw of a war dragon that was 100 miles long. It covered the entire sky and slammed down with its palm. Puff! Lone Demon Supremacy's body was smashed into pieces by the palm. Chapter 895. Dead. Supremacy Du Mo, one of the 6 demon sects supremacies, died just like that. Even the demonized supremacy Du Mo was powerless in front of Chu Fumian. He was easily slapped to death by Chu Fumian's palm. Supremacy Du Mo's blood mist drifted in the air. Just as Chu Fumian was about to devour Supremacy Du Mo's spiritual energy, something happened. A strange feeling came from Chu Fumian's body. This divine tree wants to devour Supremacy Du Mo's blood essence. Chu Fumian could sense that the young sacred tree in his body was actually emitting a wave of longing. It seemed like it wanted to devour Supremacy Du Mo's blood essence. Originally, Chu Fumian was curious as to what the divine tree needed to devour in order for it to grow. Back in the divine tree's secret realm, the young divine tree relied on the blood essence it devoured to survive. However, when Chu Fumian killed the ancestors of the other 6 demon sects, the divine tree did not want to devour them. Now, the divine tree wanted to devour Supremacy Du Mo's blood essence. Could it be that the young divine tree only devours the blood essence of sovereigns? A thought came to Chu Fumian's mind. Without hesitation, he fed Supremacy Du Mo's blood essence to the divine tree. The divine tree cheered after devouring Supremacy Du Mo's blood essence. Chu Fumian could vaguely feel the divine tree's joy. Having said that, if Chu Fumian devoured the blood essence of a ruler like that, it would be greatly beneficial to him. Chu Fumian's heart ached when the divine tree devoured the blood essence. However, the changes that occurred to the sacred tree completely swept away Chu Fumian's heartache. The divine tree seemed to have grown a little after devouring the blood essence. The roots of the divine trees in Chu Fumian's body had become a lot thicker. This also meant that Chu Fumian's body was even tougher than it was before. The sovereign's blood essence was enough to make the divine tree grow. Once the sacred tree grew, the benefits it brought to Chu Fumian went without saying. It actually made Chu Fumian's body more and more resilient. Chu Fumian's current body was unbelievably powerful. Just by relying on his physical body, his strength was not inferior to that of an ordinary ruler. Even the super experts in the immortal realm didn't have such a body. Right now, the Tree of God was still very weak. It could still grow countless times. Once it grew, Chu Fumian would be invincible in the 9 regions with his physical body alone. Losing a bit of essence blood was nothing. It was enough for the divine tree to grow. This was Chu Fumian's greatest fortune. The divine tree is really picky. Chu Fumian felt that the divine tree was only slightly satisfied after devouring solitary demon Supremacy's essence blood. This made Chu Fumian's. It seemed that the divine tree had no desire to devour ordinary blood essence at all. It could only devour the blood essence of rulers. It was not easy to encounter in Sovereign. Even among the 7 great sects, sovereigns were extremely rare. Not to mention that Chu Fumian had killed in Sovereign. It seemed that it would not be easy to satisfy the divine tree's appetite and let it grow. However, one day, Chu Fumian would let the divine tree grow. That would be the time when Chu Fengmian killed his way into the 7 great sects. At that time, he would feed the divine tree with the blood essence of countless sovereigns from the 7 great sects and let it grow. Now it's your turn. Chu Fengmian killed Lone Demon Sovereign. His blood essence had been devoured by the divine tree. Chu Fengmian turned his gaze to the War Demon Sovereign. The War Demon Sovereign saw that Lone Demon Sovereign was easily killed by Chu Fengmian even though he had turned into a demon. His face was already somewhat pale. However, at this moment, the sealed space around Chu Fengmian suddenly shattered. A surge of spiritual energy directly broke through the seal of this space. Then, a figure suddenly flew out from within. Chu Fengmian's gaze immediately followed the direction where the spiritual energy came from. An incomparably black figure suddenly appeared in the space. Although this figure looked illusory at a glance, this pitch-black figure gave off a lofty and noble aura. Everyone who saw it couldn't help but feel awe. Who are you? The moment Chu Fengmian saw this figure, a serious look appeared in his eyes. The figure's realm seemed to be the same as Chu Fengmian's. They were both in the immortal realm. However, the person's spiritual energy was much stronger than the spiritual energy of the 2 sovereigns. With the immortal realm, the person's strength surpassed that of a sovereign. Originally, Chu Fengmian thought that he was the only one in the 9 regions who could have such strength. However, it seemed that there was someone who had reached the same level as Chu Fengmian. Such a person could not be underestimated. Boy, you've gone overboard. It's fine that you killed those trash, but you actually dared to kill Lone Demon? The figure looked at Chu Fengmian and said coldly, "Kneel down now and submit to the 6 Paths Demon Gate. Then I'll let you live." "I'm the Emperor." Hearing the figure's words, Chu Fengmian immediately remembered the person's identity. The Demon Emperor, the new Demon Emperor of the 6 Paths Demon Gate. It was said that the rise of the 6 Paths Demon Gate this time was due to the appearance of the Demon Emperor. Originally, Chu Fengmian thought that the Demon Emperor would at least be an old man in the immortal realm. He did not expect the Demon Emperor to be a young man like Chu Fengmian. At the very least, Chu Fengmian could tell that the Demon Emperor was not even 30 years old. He was only a few years older than Chu Fengmian and was also a peerless genius. However, when the Demon Emperor spoke, his tone was like an order. He asked Chu Fengmian to be the 6 Paths Demon Gate's slave as if he was giving alms to Chu Fengmian. "So, it's the Demon Emperor. I was wondering who it was that came to stand up for these demons." "So, it's the Great Demon." Chu Fengmian sneered and suddenly grabbed the Battle Demon Supremacy's head. His 5 fingers pinched the Battle Demon Supremacy's head. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.